Welcome back to the channel. In this video, what we're going to do is cover Svelte in as much detail as possible. And we're going to begin with answering the question, what is Svelte? Well, I don't know about you guys, but anytime I need my questions answered, I do a quick little Google search. And that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and I searched for Svelte, and what ends up happening is this is actually a word that is in the English dictionary. And what it means is slender and elegant. And you can use this word on a person. So you can say something like, she was svelte and sophisticated. Well, why is this important? Well, let's scroll right over here so we can get the definition of the actual framework that we're utilizing. And you can see here that it says Svelte is a free and open source front-end component framework or language. So it is a front-end component framework where we can create UIs, but it is extremely slender and elegant. It is extremely svelte. So this is a very unique framework in that it's very, very, very simple to code out. The code is very elegant, and as you can see here, we can build a very simple application with not much lines of code. We have our script tags right over here, and then we have our HTML. And if you want to look at something maybe more reactive, like clicking a button, you can see that there's just not a lot of code compared to other frameworks like Vue, Angular, or React. We just define our function right over here. We have our state. We have a function that is going to update the count. And then we have our HTML that is going to update whenever we click. So this is just a lot of elegance. It's very, very simple stuff, and it kind of looks like just plain old vanilla JS. So this is what we're going to learn. We're going to learn this wonderful framework, and we're going to learn it by building 3 different projects. So the first project we're going to build is a very simple calculator application. And this is just going to get our hands dirty with Svelte and learn some of the more basic concepts like reactivity, state, etc. So what we can do here, this is again just a very simple calculator. I can do 5, and then I can say times, and I can say 4, and if I say equal, you can see here we get 20. And I can go ahead and clear that. I can also do 6 divided by 2, and I get 3 in this case. A very, very simple calculator application, but it's going to get our hands dirty within the basics of Svelte. Next up, we're going to move on to this application, which is an image gallery. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated. We're going to dive even deeper and learn more about Svelte and its features. So this right here is an image gallery where we can search for a bunch of different images based on an image API. So for example, if I want to look for cats, I can say cats here. I can click on search, and we get this really cool effect where we get a bunch of cats. And you can see we get this really nice animation that comes right out of the box with Svelte. So again, we can search for literally anything that we want. If we want elephants, for example, so we can say elephant. I can go ahead and search, and now we get a bunch of different elephants. Again, because this is coming from an API, we're not storing this data anywhere within our application. Now, once we're done with this, we're going to move on to the final boss, which is a quiz application. So this is really, really going to go a lot deeper into Svelte, and we're going to really understand a lot of the different features within it. So over here, we have 2 different cards. We can either take a biology quiz or a chemistry quiz. So let's say I want to take a chemistry quiz. When I click on it, it's going to redirect me to a different page. So if you were to look at the URL, it is completely different. And over here, we can answer all of our different questions. So which compound has the highest boiling point? Well, I don't really know. My chemistry knowledge is not that great. I can, pick whatever it is that I want. And then when I submit it, it tells me which one is right and which one was wrong and which one is the one that I selected. So this is wrong, this is wrong. This was the one that I selected, which was wrong. And then this one is the right answer. And now you can see here, if I'm going to zoom in here once more, you can see here we also keep track of our question state. So we got this question wrong. Now we can move on to the next one, and let's go over here. Let's say, I honestly have no idea, as this was the right answer, so I got both of them wrong. And at the very end, once we're done the quiz, you can see here I got 0%, 0 out of 2, and I can go back and answer these questions again. So let me go ahead and answer them right. Was this the right one? Nope. That was, actually, no, this was the right one. So you can see wrong, 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 right. And now this is green. And also this is the right one. So now we have green, green. This time 100%, 2 out of 2. We can go back. And of course, we can have as many quizzes as possible. In this case, we just have 2. And we should probably have a little bit more than 2 questions. So this is what we are going to be building, a 3-project course. And I think by the end of it, you're really going to have a solid understanding and appreciation of Svelte. So let's get into it. The first thing that we need to do in order to start coding a Svelte app is to first create a Svelte app. So let's go through the documentation and take a look at how we can do that. So if we go through the docs, you can see here that we have some simple commands that we need to execute in order to create a new Svelte app. And specifically, we're going to run npm create svelte at latest and then an app name. So this is going to assume that you have Node and npm installed on your machine. And once you have that installed, you can go ahead and execute this command. If you do not have it installed, very, very easy stuff. Just search for Node and download the latest recommended version for your operating system. Once you do that, what you can do is you can open up your terminal or your command prompt if you are on Windows machine. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And you can do an npm-v to get the version of npm that you have installed. And if you get a version like this version over here, that means you do indeed have it installed. Else, that means, well, you don't have it installed and you have to go ahead and install it. And same thing, you can of course do it with Node as well. Okay, so now what we can do here is I'm going to copy this command and I'm going to move into my desktop directory because that's where it's going to create the Svelte app. And now what we can do is we can do npm create svelte at latest, and we're going to call this calculator app because that's the first thing that we're going to work on. So calculator app. So let's go ahead and execute this, and this should create a new directory called calculator app. So we're going to go ahead and say yes to this. And it's going to go ahead and ask us for some questions. I want the skeleton project. And we're going to use TypeScript. TypeScript is a pretty much the standard at this point. So we're going to say TypeScript. We are not going to add ESLint. We're not going to add prettier. We're not going to add any of these things. So let's go ahead and kind of just skip over all this. Or I don't want any of this stuff. And there we go. So now we have our calculator app. So now what we need to do is we need to open this up inside of VS Code. So I'm going to open up a new VS Code instance here. Now, of course, you can use whatever text editor you want. I'm going to be using VS Code, and this is also pretty much a standard at this point. It's probably the best text editor out there. So I'm going to open up my calculator app, and I'm going to say, absolutely, trust everything in here. And you can see here that we get a very basic application. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in here. I think that's a little bit too much. And you can see here that we have this really, really simple application. So we have we have this Vite, we have a TypeScript config, we have a Svelte config. We don't really have to worry about pretty much anything in here except for what is in the source, because this is where we're going to be doing, I would say, 99% of our coding. So you can see here in here, there's three different things. We got 2 files and 1 directory. So you have an app.html. We don't have to worry about this. This is going to be something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but this is something that we probably shouldn't touch. We also have an app.d.ts. Again, something that we also shouldn't worry about and touch, but mostly we're going to be touching things inside of the routes directory. So right now you can see we have a page.svelte file, and right in here we have an h1, and we also have a p tag. So it looks like just basic HTML. And, well, it is basic HTML. It's going to render as basic HTML as well. So let's go ahead and try to run this inside of our browser. Now, by the way, if you go to your Svelte page and you don't see any of the syntax highlighting, like, for example, this isn't blue, it's just like one large white file, what you can do here is you can go to your extensions and you can download the Svelte extension. right here. This one, Svelte for VS Code, and it's by Svelte. And what it's going to do is going to add syntax highlighting for your Svelte files. So go ahead and do that. But now, nonetheless, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and run my application. So let's go right over here, and I'm going to continue these commands here. So the next command is move into that directory. Well, luckily, because we opened it in VS Code, we're already in the calculator app directory. Then what we need to do is npm install. So npm install is going to install all of the dependencies that we need for our application to run. So this is not a vanilla JavaScript application. We are using dependencies, which are code that is built by other people that we need to install onto this project. And that code that we need is specified in our package.json. So you can see here in our package.json, we're saying that, hey, we need these dependencies. And specifically, these are dev dependencies because they're only used in the development environment. But we need to get this package right over here, this Svelte package, this Svelte kit package. We need to get that code within our current app directory right now. And in order to do that, we're going to do an npm install. So an npm install, let's go ahead and just do that. An npm install is going to go into this package.json, look at all of the dev dependencies as well as other dependencies that we need, and it's going to install them into our application. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can see here right away, we should get a directory called node modules. And that's going to contain all of the JavaScript code that we want and we have specified right over here. Okay, so now once we have that, we should have everything we need to run our application. So I'm going to go ahead and run the app by using npm run dev. So if you go back to our package.json, you can see here in the scripts directory, we can run npm run dev, we can run npm run build, we can npm run preview, check watch. So we can do all of these different things. Now, if you want to run our application locally on our local environment, we're going to do an npm run dev, which is going to run vite dev in the background. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll say npm run dev. And for me, it's going to run the application on localhost 5176. For you, it might be probably, if this is your first instance of Svelte, it's probably going to be something like 5173, but only because I'm running 3 other Svelte instances, it kind of just goes ahead and increments them every time. So yours most likely is going to be 73 minus 76. All right, let's go ahead and run that. And there you go. You can see that the HTML that is specified within our plus page.svelte file is what we are currently rendering. And of course, if I were to change this, let me just go ahead and auto format it so it doesn't complain anymore. Now, if I were to go ahead and change this, for example, to let's say welcome to Svelte instead of Svelte kit, you can see here that this changes as well. So it seems that, again, this is what is being rendered. And if we want to modify this in any way, we're going to have to modify the code in this file. So we created our Svelte app. We got it up and running. Let's go ahead and get our hands dirty in the next few sections. The first thing that I would like to do is build the HTML structure for our calculator application. So let's go back to the complete version right over here, and you can see that there's a bunch of HTML that we need to add in order to create this UI element. So we need to probably add a few different buttons here. You know, we also have to add styling. We have to have some sort of container altogether. So let's go ahead and build that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our application. We're going to go to the page.svelte file, and we're going to completely remove everything. Now, once we remove everything, you can see if you go back to our application, we get a blank app. Now, in order to create the HTML, like we saw before, we just go ahead and stick it into this file. So let's go ahead and accomplish that together. So we're going to create a main tag, and then within this main tag, I'm going to add a div that's going to have the class of calculator. because we're going to later on style our elements. So let's go ahead and add the classes right away. Now over here, we're going to have a bunch of other div elements. So the first thing that I want to add is a div element for this display right over here. So this is displaying, the values that we're clicking and also, the overall result that we get here. So that is going to be our display or our results. So we're going to say here dot results, and I'm using an Emmet abbreviation here. What this is going to do is create a div with a class of results. Now that's going to be the results, and also we also need another div that is going to house all of these different digits. So I'm going to say digits, and that's going to go ahead and create a div with a class of digits. And then within this, we're going to have another display, and this is going to have our numbers, and then we're going to have another div that's going to have our operations. So let's create another div here that's going to have all of our different numbers. And then within this, we're going to have a bunch of different buttons. So we're going to have a button, and then on this button, we're going to have, our C button to kind of clear things out like this right here. Let me zoom in here. So we're going to have our C button to clear things out, and I have to zoom out. We're going to have a bunch of other buttons like our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buttons. So let's go ahead and just add those in manually as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just add those in. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Missing one more. Let's copy that, paste that in, and 9. So now we have all of those different buttons. So let's go over here. So now we have C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we're also missing 0. So let's go ahead and add that in as well. And over here, we're going to say 0. And we're also going to add the decimal point in here as well. So now we have all of our different buttons, or our numeric buttons, including the C and the dot, that we need to build our calculator. Now we also need this part over here, which is going to be the operations. So let's go and wrap this in another div. So I'm going to go right over here, and I'm going to say operations. So I'm going to say operations. And then over here, we're going to have a bunch of other buttons that are going to be our operations. So let's go just grab this button, and we need a few operations here. We need division operation, and we need the multiplication. We're just going to use the X for this. Let's use the addition. So we're going to say plus, and then also we'll say minus. And are we missing any other operation? Also the equal, just so we can go ahead and figure out, what this is equal to. So the equal operation. And that's it. That should be our HTML structure. So if I were to go over here, you can see that we have all of our buttons. Of course, they're not styled at all. We need to, of course, style them to make it look a little bit better. But right now, we have defined our HTML structure within our Svelte application. And that's pretty much all you need to do for defining our structure. You have a page.svelte file, and you just stick your HTML in there, and it figures out exactly what it needs to render. And that's exactly what it is doing right here. Now, of course, this looks hideous. I do not like it whatsoever. So in the next video, let's just do a quick little refactor so that this can be a little bit prettier. In this section of the course, what we're going to do is focus in on styling our application. So we built the HTML, but as you can see, it is a horrendously disgusting looking application. We need to add a few more styling so that it can look a little bit prettier like this over here. Now, luckily, adding styling to our Svelte application is really easy. All we have to do is within the Svelte file itself, create a style tag. So I'm going to go ahead and create this style tag. And then within this, we can define all of our different styles. So for example, let's say I want to style this div right over here that has a class of calculator. I would just go ahead and say dot calculator. And I'm going to go ahead and just say background color of, let's say, aqua. And if I were to do that, you can see the styles have been applied. And that's pretty much all it is that you need to know for styling a Svelte application. Your CSS knowledge can, well, transfer relatively easily. Now, because this is a Svelte course and I don't want to worry all too much about styling, I'm just going to go ahead and paste all of the different classes as well as their styling within our app right over here. Now, for you to go ahead and grab this, all you have to do is you have to go to my GitHub repository that I'll have in the link in the description below. Go to the calculator application, go to source, go to the routes, go to the page.svelte file, and just go ahead and copy all of these styles and just paste them in here. That's pretty much all it is that you need to do. Now, once I paste that in there, of course, these styles are going to be applied. However, it is pretty horrendous at this point. Obviously, it doesn't look like our final app, and that's because we still have to apply some of these class names to our HTML elements. For example, the button needs to have a btn class that we have defined right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, and we're going to go, let's go here. I'm going to grab this and just literally paste it in all of our different buttons. So I'm going to say button, 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 button. We're going to say button, 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 and button. All right, there we go. So now we have our application. It's looking a little bit better, but it's still kind of horrendous. The first thing I want to work on is this button right over here. So the C button, which is the clear button. You can see that it is pretty much 3 times as large as all of the other buttons. So that's what we need to do. We need to make this 3 times as large. Now, luckily, we have a class for that, which is going to be btn x large. So I'm going to say here, on top of all of the styling that I get from button, I want to make it btn x large. And you can see now it is, well, x large. It spans 3 different buttons. Another thing we also need to do is we need to make this button 2 buttons, or the width of 2 buttons. Again, luckily we have a class for that as well. I keep going to the wrong page here, and that's going to be button large. So I can go ahead and go to this 0, and I can say button large like so. And now you can see here we have our 0. Now this is looking pretty good. It's looking incredibly similar. The only difference I can see now is that the operations have a different background color. So let's go back over here and let's go to the operations. And what we want is we want that orangey color. So what we can do is we can grab this btn orange and we can just place it right in here. So you can say btn orange, btn orange, btn orange, btn orange. All right, so now once we do that, you can see we have our calculator fully styled and everything is ready to go. So that is how we style our application. I know we kind of quickly copied and pasted these things into it, but really all you have to know for a Svelte application is to style a specific file, the HTML, all you have to do is add the style tag. Now, we're pretty much done with the HTML as well as the CSS. Now, let's go and get our hands dirty and make all of this functional. And this is where we're going to really see the powers of Svelte. Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and dive into the JavaScript Svelte side of things. And the first thing that I would like to do is to clean up our code a little bit. Because right now, as you can see, we're rendering a bunch of different buttons that have a lot of the same attributes. So you can see button 1 to 9 are exactly the same. They have exactly the same class. All that is different is what is inside of the button. And really, this button too is kind of similar. This button is very similar, except it has a different class. And this button also is exactly the same. And same right over here. A lot of these buttons, or all of these buttons, have exactly the same attributes, except for the content within them. So this isn't a very good approach because, you know, we're hard coding all of these different buttons, even though they have a lot of the same functionality and styling to them. So instead, this is what I would like to do. I would like to, in some sort of JavaScript way, define our all of our different operations in some sort of array. So for example, all of our numbers, we can just define them in an array, And then what I would like to do is iterate over that array. And then for each element within that array, I want to render a button. So eventually it would look something like this. So we get the same exact effect that we have already, but this is much cleaner and it's going to be easier to manage and update and change. So this is what we want to accomplish. So let's go ahead first and foremost and create that array. Now, whenever we want to create something with JavaScript, you might have guessed it, we're going to add a script tag. And typically the script tag is at the very top because that's where all of the logic is going to be. So we're going to add a script tag. And if you want to use TypeScript with it, all you have to do is say lang, and then we can say that that is equal to TypeScript. If you're unfamiliar with TypeScript, that is completely fine, not a problem. I'll try to explain everything as much as possible. And really, TypeScript in this course is probably going to be just a lot of JavaScript. Okay, so let's go ahead and define our numbers. So I'm going to say numbers, and then over here I'm going to say an array. And I'm going to make this a const because we're not really going to change it within our application. We're going to say here 1. And we're going to make this strings, not numbers. So we're going to say 4. We'll say 5, 6, 7. We'll say 8, 9. And also we need 0. And also, I know this is not a number, but we'll also include the decimal point because we need that in there. Okay, so we have our numbers now. This is all great. Let's go back to our application. But of course, now what we want to do is we want to iterate over those numbers and start rendering these different buttons. So how do we do that in Svelte? Well, this is what we do. So what we do is we wrap everything in a for each block. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, let me just comment what we got out. So I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to go right over here. And I'm going to say curly braces. And then I'm going to say each over here. And what this is going to do is it's going to iterate over an array. Now, of course, we have to specify that array. So we're going to say numbers. We want to iterate over each of the numbers array. Now, for each element that is currently iterating over, what we want to do is we want to grab that element, the content within that element, so we can render a specific button. So in order to grab that element, we're going to say as number. So let's say that our Svelte is iterating over this array, and it's currently iterating over the first number. So this number right now is going to be equal to 1. And then it's iterating over the second number. Well, this number over here is going to be equal to 2, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, we, of course, need to also close this. So we're going to say here, we're going to say each to close it. So it's kind of like HTML. We need to have a closing tag as well. But within here, what we can do now is we can pass in the HTML that we want to render. So if I were to go ahead and just save this right now, you can see we get a bunch of different ones, which is good. It seems like we're iterating over our array, and we are iterating over our array, and we're rendering our button. But of course, we want this to be dynamic. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to remove that 1 altogether. And then within that 1, we're just going to say curly braces and then number. Let's go ahead and save that, and now you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the 0, and the decimal. So this is significantly cleaner. Now there is one issue, and of course the issue is that this 0 should have a different style than the other numbers. As you can see here, this 0 has another class of button large. Now, the easiest way to do this is to just do a simple little check over here. So instead of returning a string, what we can do is we can return some JavaScript. So we can wrap that with curly braces. And then over here, we can use template literals. We're going to use template literals here. And we're going to say, well, if the number is equal to 0, then what we want to do is we want to add another string to it. Else, we don't want to return anything else. So over here, now what we can do is we can say btn, and we'll say large. I think that's what it was called, yeah. And now if I were to save that, you can see now we get that effect where it is back to being nice and large. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that you need to do. Now, another thing that we also are missing is this button right over here, the C button. Now, because this isn't a button itself, and it's kind of just a way to clear things out, I would say don't put it in here. I would say just put it as its own button, like so. So now, there we go. So now we have everything working together pretty well. Okay, so we can now remove this code, which is really nice. You can see how much simpler our code got. Now we're just iterating over this array, and we can do the exact same thing over here. So let's define another constant, and this time we're going to call this operations. Operations. And over here, what we're going to do is we're going to define our operations. So what operations do we have? Well, we have the division operation, the multiplication operation, the subtraction operation, the plus operation, and then the equal operation. So let's go ahead and grab this. And now we can iterate over this. And I highly suggest pause the video and try to do this on your own, just for practice sake. So what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and, we want to loop over the operations. We're going to say as operation. And then what we want to do is we want to have a closing tag for our each block. And then what we want to do is for each operation, we want to render this button. Now, of course, we're going to dynamically have our operation. And then we can just go ahead and remove this altogether. How cool is that? So now we can go ahead and format it the way that we want to, and it should look the same. And that's really all it is that we have to do. And you can see our code has significantly gotten smaller. And I mean, I can fit this whole block of our HTML now within, this kind of screen size, whereas before I had to scroll back and forth. You can see that this is a lot simpler. Now, another thing that we should do anytime that we are iterating over an array is provide some sort of unique identifier. So Svelte needs this anytime that we decide to update our array, and it just makes it more performant and a little less buggy. Now, in this case, we're not really ever updating our array, so it doesn't matter all too much. Because of course we define this as a const, and we're probably, even if we did define it as a const, we can always push things into our array, and that's going to add things, and we can always remove things from our array. So it is very important that we add some sort of unique identifier for performance reasons. So what we're going to do here to define that unique identifier is we're going to go over here, and then inside of this each block, and then define that identifier within these parentheses. Now, a unique identifier for this array is probably the numbers themselves. You can see all of these numbers are different. There is no duplicates here. So I can just say number like so, and that is going to be a unique identifier. And we can, of course, do the exact same thing for the operation, because the operation, again, itself is all unique. Now, if we had, something else, like over here, we had another plus, then this probably wouldn't be a good choice, because as you can see here, we have two pluses, and that's not unique, and that's going to cause, the performance benefits that you get, they're not going to be there anymore. So we need to find some sort of unique identifier. Luckily, all of these are unique. And that's pretty much it. And as you can see now, if you go to our application, of course, nothing is functional, but it still looks exactly the same, but the code quality is significantly better. So that's pretty much all it is that we have for this lecture. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. In this section, what we're going to do is handle an extremely important concept in Svelte to understand, and that is state and handlers. So to tackle this and to try to really understand this, this is what I want to accomplish. So I'm in the final version over here, and you can see that my first number is 3, and then I'm prompted to select a operation. Now, whenever I click on a specific operation, you can see that the background color of that operation is changing, telling us that, hey, this is the thing that you have selected. So that's really all I want to do right now. All I want to do is when I click on a specific operation, it changes the background color. and that is going to introduce the concept of state. So right now, our application is in a state where the selected operation is plus. And because we're in that state, we're able to manipulate the background color of that specific operation button. Now, of course, we can always change the state of our application so that the selected operation, let's say this time, is multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and change the state, and you can see this is changing the UI itself. Now, right now, you can see that the background color of the plus is orange, whereas the multiplication is gray. So that is exactly what state is. Our application is in a different state, and because it's in a different state, we're changing the UI altogether. Okay, so how are we going to define the state within our application? Really, really easy. We define it like we define any variable that we might want to eventually change. And that, of course, is by using the let keyword. We're going to say let, and we're going to say selected operation, and we're going to say that that is going to be equal to an empty string. Now, of course, we can go ahead and change this anytime that we want to, and it's going to update the UI once we have specified it over here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try to update our selected operation. So whenever I click on one of these buttons, I want to change this to either, divide or times or minus or plus. And then I probably don't want to have this equal to be, well, I don't want it to be equal to equal because I just want these operations right over here. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is what we're going to do. Whenever we click on this button, we're going to run a function that is going to update this state. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add an event handler. So an event that might happen on this specific element is we might click on it. So we want to listen to that event. So what we do here is right on the button itself, we say on, and then colon. You can see that there's a bunch of different events. On abort, on blur, on drag, on play, on whatever. Now over here specifically, we're going to choose on click. So whenever we click, we want to, well, go ahead and select a specific operation. So I'm going to say here, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call this handle operation click, because that's exactly what we did. And we're going to define that function inside of our JavaScript. So I'm going to say const handle operation click. And then over here, this is going to take in the operation. Now this operation is going to be of type string. So we're just going to define the type because we're using TypeScript here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update the selected operation to the operation that we got over here. So I'm going to say selected operation, and I'm going to say that that is going to be equal to this operation. Very, very simple stuff. There's nothing all too complicated going on here. Okay, so now what we can do is we can just grab this handle click, and then over here, instead of kind of calling it like this, what we can do is we can use a callback function. Oops, I made a mistake here. So what we can do is we can use a callback function. So we can use this callback function that calls this function. And that way we can actually invoke it and then pass in the operation itself. So there we go. That's pretty much all it is. So now we updated this state and we added an event handler that can kind of listen to a click event and then update the state accordingly. Now, if I were to, of course, go back to my app over here and I start clicking around, well, nothing. You see, it seems as though nothing is happening. But let's go ahead and just render Let's go ahead and just render this selected operation somewhere. I'm gonna go render it right here, for example, and let's see if we can see it. Let's just give it. We'll make it nice and bright. So we're going to say H1, and we're going to remove these styles a little bit later, but let's just make it color pink just so we can really see it. I still don't see it. Oh yeah. So we don't see it now because it's an empty string. Let me go ahead and now change the state to subtraction. There we go. We saw it. And then change the state to plus. You can see now this is updating. Change the state to times. Change the state to divide. So you can see that this is indeed working and it's updating the UI of our application, which is really, really cool. Now let's go ahead and just completely remove that. We don't need that anymore. So instead, what I would like to do, instead of just displaying the operation, I would like to change the background color. So very similarly to what we have done right over here, we can do the exact same thing. So I am going to go right over here, and I'm going to wrap this in parentheses, and I'm going to use template literals here. So we're going to say button, and then we're going to dynamically either render button orange, or there's another class in there called button silver. So we're going to say $ curly braces. I'm going to say if the operation is equal to the selected operation, then I want to go ahead and render button silver. And then else, I'm going to go ahead and render button orange. So let's go ahead and save that. And if I were to come here, now you can see we get that cool effect. And this is a very fundamental concept in Svelte, state and handlers, and updating our state and updating our UI. So really try to understand it, because we're going to be seeing it throughout every single project and every single Svelte project that you create as well. In this section, what I would like to do is work on a little bit more state logic within our Svelte calculator. So what I would like to do now is whenever I click on one of these buttons, I want it to display right over here like I have done inside of this final version. As you can see here, I can click on any one of these buttons and it displays right here in this display. Now, of course, this is going to involve state because we are currently changing the state of our application. So let's go over here to the code. And again, whenever I click on this, I want to change the display. So let's define a new piece of state, and that piece of state is going to be called display. So I'm going to say display. I'm going to go ahead and make this an empty string for now. Now let's go and render this display within our HTML. So right over here inside of this results, I'm going to go ahead and kind of, make this like so. And then we're going to add, let's say, you know what, we'll just go ahead and just say display. We could add some sort of typography, a component, but we'll just do it like that. Now, if I were to go back, of course, you see nothing. But if I were to change this to like 333, we should see 333. Okay, so this is looking good. And now we know that this is what we want to update whenever we click on one of these buttons. So let's add a click handler. So I'm going to say on, and I'm going to say click. And then over here, we're going to create, or we're going to call a new function. And this function is going to be an arrow function that's going to call a function called, we'll call it handle number click. And we're going to pass it in the number itself. So we're going to say number is equal to that. Okay, now of course it's complaining. Let's go ahead and just format this just a little bit better. Now it's complaining because right here, as you can see, we haven't defined this function. So let's go ahead and define it. So I'm going to say const handle number click. We're going to say number. Now this is going to be of type string, not number, because remember these are strings of numbers. And then over here, we're going to go ahead and actually handle this. So what do we want to do? Well, really, really easy. What we want to do is we want to say display is equal to not, so this might be a very common mistake. So we're going to say display is not equal to the number itself, because what that's going to do is replace the number. We do not want to do that. So what we want to do instead is, well, something like this. So we want to, let's use template literals. So whatever the current display is, show it, but also append this other number. So we're gonna, whatever the current display is, show it, but also add this other number as well. And what that's going to do is now we can, do things like 20, 208, etc., etc. So this is looking good, but there's a lot of different nuances and there's a lot of different things that we have to worry about here. Because right now, if I wanted to, for example, I can add a decimal point. Okay, that makes sense. But then I can add another decimal point and another decimal point and another decimal point. And of course, this isn't valid. This isn't a valid number. I can also do something like 8.8.8.8. Again, not a valid number. Another thing that I can do is I can add a 0 even though we have nothing in the display right now. So we can say 0, 0, 0, 5. Well, we shouldn't really allow this because 0, 0, 0, 5 is just 5. So we shouldn't allow that. However, we should allow, if you have something in the display, to add zeros, to increase the amount of digits that you have. So there are a lot of things that we need to worry about. Of course, this button too is not working. So let's just go and handle the very easiest thing. And let's say if we have nothing in our display, I don't want to have the ability to add a 0. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go right over here and we're going to check. We're going to say if the number is equal to 0, or let's first check if the display is equal to nothing and the number is equal to 0. So, and the number is equal to 0. Then what I want to do is I want to return early. I don't want to do anything. So let's go back here and now let's give that a shot. So this works. Of course, I can click 555. But if I have nothing in there, you can see perfect. It's not adding anything in. Now, if I were to add 8 and then add a bunch of zeros, that does work. So that's really good. Okay, so that's pretty incredible. Now, the other thing I want to tackle is I don't want to have more than one decimal point. So for example, if I were to add 9 and then add another decimal point and then 8, 5, I don't want to have the ability to add another decimal point because you can only really have one. So this is what we're going to do to tackle this. To tackle this, what we're going to say is if the number, and I know that this isn't really a number, but we'll just say if the number is equal to a decimal point and the display already has a decimal point, so we can say display.includes to kind of traverse the string and check if it includes a decimal point already, then what we want to do is we want to return early. So we don't want to update our state, we just want to go ahead and return. So let's give this a quick shot now. So I'm going to say 25.5, and then if I try to add another point, as you can see, this isn't indeed working. Okay. So this is incredible. We have kind of made our application a little bit more foolproof, but there are some other things that we also need to work on. So the first thing that I would like to work on is if I click on a decimal point and it's the very first thing, instead of just showing the decimal point, I want to say 0 and then dot. So that's what I would like to show instead. So let's accomplish that. Let's add an if statement here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if, and we're going to say if the display, so we're going to say if the display is equal to an empty string, and we're going to say the number is a decimal. What we're going to do is we're going to return early again, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to return this. So we can even just kind of hard code this as a string like so. We're just going to return 0 and then dot. So that's going to ensure whenever we first click on this, we get 0 dot, and then we can go ahead and start appending other things in there. Now, of course, there's other checks that we can do. We can also check that your number is not too big. We can check that, there's a bunch of other things that we can do, but I think this is pretty good, and you guys probably get the gist of it. Now, of course, if you continue playing around, you can probably find some issues that might linger, but again, this is fine. You guys probably understand the point for this tutorial. Okay, so this is looking amazing, but now what we need to do is we need to have the ability to, select a specific number, and then we need to select an operation, And then once we select the operation, we need to select another number. So we should be able to do something like, for example, 36 times and then 25. But right now you can see that it's just kind of continuously appending numbers in here. So that's definitely not what we want. So we need to have some sort of way to first figure out that, well, we have one number. We need to store that first number, and then we need to figure out what the operation is, which we kind of already know by the state. And then once we have an operation, what we need to do is we need to select our second number. So the thing is we're going to have to create another piece of state. I'm going to say selected, and we're going to say selected first number. Or you know what, we'll just call this first number instead of selected first number. And then over here, we're going to have another piece of state called second number. We're going to go ahead and say that that is going to be equal to 0. Now over here, what we're going to need to do is we need to, of course, update these. So how do we know that we're updating either the first number or the second number? Well, we're going to know that we're updating the first number if we haven't selected an operation yet. Now, if we have selected an operation, then we are going to be updating the second number, and we should probably display the second number. So let's go right over here, and I'm going to check if we have not selected an operation yet. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and go ahead and create this number. Now over here, we're going to have to kind of do this check in here as well. Let's go ahead and format that, because this is going to update either the first number or the second number. So we're going to go ahead and do this check. So we're going to say if display is equal to string and this is equal to number. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that the first number is equal to the string of 0 dot. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say that the display is equal to the first number. So the display is equal to that first number. Now, of course, if we don't hit this condition, then what we're going to do here is we're going to say that the first number is equal to the template literal. We're going to say $ and then curly brace. I'm going to say that this is going to be the selected number, or the first number. So we're going to say first number and then the actual number that we have over here. So we're going to say number like so. And then what we can do is we can say the display is equal to that first number. So I hope that makes sense. We're pretty much doing everything, but we're storing the variable in the first number, and then we're storing it in the display so we can actually show it as well. Now this is for some reason doubling. So first number, what's going on here? So first number is equal to first number, and then the actual number itself. I wonder why that's happening. Let's see here, 3, 3. First number, I'm not really sure why that's happening. I feel like it shouldn't be happening. Is it a empty string? Oh, the display. Let's go ahead and display the first number just to see what's going on here. So I'm gonna go right over here, and let's go to the display, and let's just display the first number. So first number, save that, 3. So it seems as though when we hit this point, it seems as though it kind of doubles, which is kind of strange. I was not expecting that. So let's go over here. Let's see if we have any bugs. So we're going to say if, we're doing it. Okay, here's what's happening. So we're saying it's the first number, and then we have this kind of display over here. So what we should do is we should probably return early, or even just remove this altogether. Okay, so now let's go back over here. Let's say for display, and let's look at it now. All right, cool. And now we can click on the division, and then we're not really updating anything at this point because now we need to handle the second number. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So now what we can do is in this else clause, so we can have an else clause over here. And now what we want to do is we want to handle the second number. So we can have the same exact check. And this time we want to handle the second number. And this time, we're going to also display the second number. Now we're still storing the first number, but we're displaying the second number, which makes sense. Let's go ahead and format this just a little bit better. And of course, we can do the exact same thing here. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of copy paste this verbatim. And we can also, to make our code a little bit cleaner, we should probably also store this inside of a function. But I think this is good for now. So I'm going to say second number is equal to second number. And let's go over here and let's grab that. We're going to say display is equal to second number. Okay. And now what we can do is, if we were to go back to our application, now what we can do is 35 times, let's say 55. And you can see now it is displaying that second number. Okay, so this is terrific. And this is kind of, it's pretty complicated logic. So if you understand what's going on here, that is pretty good. In this lecture, what we're going to do is wrap up the functionality of our application. We pretty much are done everything. We're storing everything that we need to do. We just need to wrap it up by actually doing the operations and making these portions functional. So let's go over here. And we're going to go and we're going to primarily work today on, or right now, on the handle operation click. So the first thing that I would like to do is, if you haven't selected a first number, so if this is an empty string, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and prevent you from selecting an operation altogether. So let's go ahead and do that check. So I'm going to say if you haven't selected a first number, so we're going to say if first number is equal to, and we're going to say if the first number is equal to an empty string, then what we want to do is we want to prevent you from selecting an operation. So now, if I were to try to select an operation, you can see here that it doesn't work. However, if I click 6, now I can select an operation. All right. Now, all of the other operations other than this equal, if I click on them, I already have the logic for it. I just want to update the current state that I am in. Now, we need to add the logic for when we select equal, because this is going to be the big one, of course, because this is where it gets the first number and the second number, and it does whatever operation that we choose. So over here, let's add the logic for if the operation is equal. Then what we want to do is, first we want to do a check. We want to ensure that the first number and the second number are defined. Now, if we ever reach this check, then yes, the first number is defined. We also have to assert that the second number is defined. So we can say here, if the second number, and what we can do to actually kind of simplify this is we can do something like this. And we can say here, if the second number is not defined, we also want to return early and not do anything. Now, if both of those numbers are defined, then what we're going to do is we're going to parse them into numbers themselves. So I'm going to say const, and I'll say first num, and I'm going to say that this is going to be a parse int. I'll go ahead and say selected or first number, like so. And then also we'll say second num, and that's going to be equal to parse int. We'll say second number, because of course these were strings before. We need to change them to numbers. So now what we can do is we can, well, either divide them or multiply them depending on the operation, the selected operation right here. So let's go ahead and do that. So now what we can do here is let's just say let results, and we're going to say that that is going to be equal for now to an empty string. And what we're going to do is, instead of having a bunch of if-else statements, I'm going to switch on the selected operation. So we're going to add a switch statement here. And we're going to say, well, if the switch statement says that the selected operation is division, then what we're going to do is we're going to say that the results is equal to, and we're going to say that the results is equal to the first num divided by the second num. All right. Now the results is complaining at this point, because what we're doing is we have assigned this first to be an empty string, so it's type of string. But now what we're doing is we're kind of reassigning it to a number. So what we can do here is we can just say 2 fixed, because we probably want to get 2 decimal points. We can say 2 fixed of 2, like so. And then we can break. All right, and of course we can do the other case. So we're going to say case, and then over here we're going to say multiplication. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of copy what we got here. Let's go ahead and just copy that in. We're going to say results, but this time it's multiply. And let's go ahead and just copy this again. Paste that in there. And then this time we're going to have a plus. And then plus. And then lastly, we're going to have the last case, which is going to be the subtraction case. And then this time we have subtract, subtract. And there we go. So now what we can do is we can just say that the display is equal to the results. And that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. So let's go ahead and save that. Now let's do 25 times 2, which should be 50. There we go. You can see that it works. Now another thing that we should do is we should have the ability to, you can see now it gets a little bit funky whenever I click on it again. Because if I just say 2 times 2, for example, and then I say equal to, and then I add another 2, you can see that the first number hasn't been cleared out. So what we want to do here is we want to pretty much clear everything if we click on it again and we're displaying the results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. I'm going to say is displaying results. So is displaying results. And that's just going to be a Boolean value. And I'm going to say that initially this is false. But then, and we're going to say let for this. But then what we're going to do is right at the very bottom, we're going to say is displaying results. We're going to change that to be true, like so. Now what we can do is at the very top here where we are selecting our operation is that if we're displaying our results, we kind of want to clear everything altogether. So what we can do here is let's go to number click. We're going to say if is displaying results, then what we want to do is we want to clear the first name, the selected operation, as well as the display. Because now what we want to do, because what we're doing is we're clicking on another number, which means we want to do kind of another mathematical operation. So we want to clear everything. So how are we going to clear everything? Let's just create a function that's just going to handle that for us. So I'm going to say const, and I'll say handle clear. And then over here, what we can do is we can say that the first number, we're going to say that that's going to be equal to a string. Let's say the second number is equal to a string, and then we're going to say the selected operation is equal to a string. We're just going to go back to the initial setting that we had. So the display is equal to a string, and also is displaying results. At this point, we're going to say that that is going to be false. So over here, we can go ahead and call that handle clear, and that's it. So we can format it a little bit better. And also another thing that we can do, and we should do, is whenever we click on the C button, we should call that function. So we can say on a click, and because this doesn't take any parameters, we don't have to do that typical arrow function and invoke it. We can just kind of call it like this right over here. Okay, and that concludes our very first project. So now we get 35 times 2, which is not working for some reason. So 35 times 2 is equal to, and why is that not working? So let's go over to let's go back to our operation here, and I believe this should be here. That's why it's not working. There we go. This should be within the equal sign. So we're only displaying our results if the operation is equal. That's why it was bugging out. Apologies for that. So we're going to say times 2. That should equal to 70. But now when I click on another number, you can see it kind of clears everything out. We can say 8 times 8 is equal to 64. I can also click on this button to clear everything back to the original state. So that concludes the very first project, and it gives you a good little introduction to Svelte. And hopefully by this point you kind of understand the basics, because these are the basic concepts that you need to understand if you want to develop more complicated apps, which we are doing in the next few sections. So the next section that we're going to work on is this app right over here, the image gallery. So again, I can go ahead and giraffe, is that how you spell it? I'm not 100% sure. And we can just get a bunch of little pictures of giraffes. So this is going to be maybe not significantly more complicated, but it is going to be more complicated. But we're going to use a lot of what we have learned from the calculator app, because those are the fundamentals. Anyways, I'll see you guys then. Time for our second project. This project is going to be the image gallery. So we have this image gallery, we have this input right over here, and in here we can put literally anything that we want. So for example, I can put in buildings, and if I were to go ahead and search, I get a bunch of different buildings. So what this is doing is it's hitting a Unsplash API with a specific term, and we're getting back a response, and we're rendering that response on our Svelte application. So let's go ahead and build this out, but first we need to create a Svelte app. So let's go to our terminal. I'm going to say npm create Svelte at latest, and then I'm going to say image gallery, like so. So that is going to create a new Svelte application. Now it's going to proceed to ask us a few questions here. So let's go ahead and answer these questions. So we're going to say skeleton project. We're going to say TypeScript. We'll just say we want to add nothing. And there we go. Now we have our wonderful Svelte app. Okay. So now that we have that, let us go ahead and open it up in VS Code. So I'm going to go here to open. I'm going to go to desktop, and I'm going to go to image gallery and go ahead and open that up. So now that we have that open, we can start going ahead and coding out our app. So as a quick reminder, we have our source, and we're going to do primarily all of our work right over here in the page.svelte file. But before we do that, let's open up our integrated terminal, and let's do an npm run dev in order to run our application. And sorry, it's not npm run dev. Instead, it is, let's go here. It is npm run dev. It's just we have to do an install. So let's do an npm install first. And then after the install, we can do an npm run dev. So let's just wait this out a little bit. Come on, and then npm run dev, like so. And there we go. So now for me, it's running on localhost 5176. So let's go ahead and just close that off here. And let's go there. So I'm going to go to localhost 5176. There we go. And here's our final app. Okay. So the first thing that I want to do very quickly is just build out the HTML and CSS structure. So let's go back to our application, and we can get rid of this terminal as well. And over here, let's go to our page. And the first thing I want to do is let's add the styles. So I'm going to say style. I'm going to go ahead and paste in a bunch of styles. And you can get this from my GitHub that I will link in the description below. And now what we can do is we can build out our HTML. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a div with a container, and then a div with a class of header. And then I'm going to have an h1 that says image gallery. So image gallery. And then we're going to have a input container. An input container. And then within this input container, we're going to have our actual input. So I'm going to say input like so. All right. So let's go ahead and clear that. Just take a look at how that looks. All right. It looks pretty decent to me. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a button. And actually, we also have to give this a class of input as well. And there we go. Now it looks better. So let's add a button here. So I'm going to say button. And this button is going to have a class of button as well. So button, like so. And now we can see there's a button there. Now, of course, this button needs to have some text. So let's go ahead and just close that off. And I'm going to say search, like so. And there we go. So now we have a button that has the search icon in there. All right, and now what we need to do is right below our header, what we need to do is we need to display our photos. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say dot photos. And then over here is where we're going to display our image. So we're going to have an image. We're going to have a source, an alt. We're also going to have a class that is going to be of type image. And that should do it for our HTML and CSS. So that was a relatively quick little thing that we did there. Let's just go ahead and just kind of copy a bunch of images. You can see that we have these 4 image layouts. Of course, we're going to have to fill them out with the source. So that is going to be the HTML and CSS. We've already addressed all this stuff in the previous project, so that's why I kind of went through this really quick. I want to start addressing the more complicated stuff in this one. So let's go ahead and start making this more functional in the next video. In this section of the course, we are going to learn all about fetching data. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to our application right over here, this complete application that we're trying to build. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for gorilla. And then I'm going to do a quick little search here. And as you can see, we get a bunch of different images of gorillas. Now, these images are data points that we need to fetch from some database into our Svelte application. And that is exactly what I mean by fetching data. We have a Svelte application, and then we have some sort of database that lives in the cloud. And what we need to do is somehow, some way, we need to get the data from this database into our Svelte application. Now, in our case, the data is just a bunch of image URLs, but we have to somehow get it into our Svelte app. Now, how are we going to do that? Are we going to directly connect and interact with the database and just get back everything that we need? Well, no, that's not typically how it happens. Typically, we use a client-server model. So something like this. So we have this middleman over here that the client can interact with. Now, this is called either a server or an API. The term is usually interchangeable. And what happens is that this exposes a bunch of different endpoints that allow us to fetch data from our database. So what happens is that the Svelte client makes an HTTP request to our API or some other API. That API then proceeds to fetch all of the necessary data based on that particular request, and then it sends it right back to the client over here, and then the client can render everything that it needs. So that is what we want to accomplish. Now that begs the question, where are we going to get our API? Are we going to create our own API, or are we going to use some external API? Well, for this case, we're going to be using some external API. So the API that we're going to be working with is this one over here, which is Unsplash. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to Unsplash developers, and I want you to log in, and you can just log in with Facebook. And what I want you to do is to create a new application. So we're going to go over here. We're going to say new application, and then we're going to say this API, blah, blah, blah. We're going to kind of accept all of this. And we're going to accept all these terms and conditions. We're going to call this image gallery. And let's go ahead and create this. And we're going to say this is an image gallery. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create our application. And once we create our application, we can start using their API. So I'm going to go over here to the API status. And you can see here that we have a few different, or we have a number of different requests that we have. And if I were to go back here, and I were to go to the, let's go back to where I have my apps. I'm going to go to this app right over here, and I am going to go scroll all the way down here. And as you can see here, we have this access key and this secret key. So we're going to need to utilize the access key in order to make requests to Unsplash API. So let's go to VS Code, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you the structure of the endpoints that we're going to hit. So we're going to say the structure of the endpoint is going to be HTTPS : and then API unsplash.com, and then we're going to do /search. So this is the endpoint specifically /photo, and then we're going to ask for the page. So we're going to say one page. These are query parameters that we're adding here, and then we're going to specify exactly what we want to search for. So I'm going to say query, and then for now I'm going to say is equal to office. Maybe I want some pictures of the office. Of course, this is going to change depending on our search. And then we have to add our client ID. So I'm going to say and I'm going to say client underscore ID, and that is going to be equal to this. So let's go ahead and paste that. And now if I were to send this off inside of the browser, let's go over here, we should get a JSON value of all of the different data. So let's go ahead and just paste that in there. And there seems to be a typo, so let's go back here. So it's HTTPS // API, and this should be .unsplash rather than /unsplash. So let's go back here now. Let's make that request. And there we go. You can see we're getting a bunch of different data. You can see here, this is all of the different data. And you can see here that we have all of our different images. So now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and not do this in the browser, but do this within our Svelte application. So let's tackle that in the next lecture. Now that we have learned exactly how to fetch data, let's go ahead and do it from our Svelte application. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to do is install a package to our app. So a package is a bunch of code that somebody else wrote that we are going to utilize within our application for some specific feature. Now for us, what we're going to do is install the Axios package, which is an extremely popular package that allows us to make HTTP requests to other endpoints. And you can see here that it is extremely popular. It gets around 43 million downloads every single week. So it's probably something that you should be comfortable with. So let's go ahead and install a package. So I'm going to go and open up my terminal, and in the same directory as my package.json file, so make sure you're in that same directory, we're going to do an npm install, and we're going to install Axios. So once we do that, we should have Axios right here as a dependency. Okay, that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. Now what we can do is we can create a script file. So I'm going to say script with a source. I'm going to say, or not without a source, we're just going to say lang is equal to ts, and we're going to import that package in. So we're going to say import Axios from Axios. And now what we can do is we can utilize Axios to fetch data. So I'm going to go and create a function. I'm going to call this function fetch data, and then or we can call it fetch images or fetch whatever. And then this is going to be an asynchronous function. So this is because Axios is going to return a promise. So as you can see here, it's a promise-based HTTP client for browsers and Node.js. So we need to mark it as async. And then over here, we're going to say const, and then response. So response, and that's going to be equal to await Axios. And then what we need to do is we need to specify the URL right over here. So this endpoint that we want to hit, but we also need to specify the HTTP verb. So the HTTP verb is either going to be a get or a post or a patch. And this is going to be specified at the API level. However, the typical convention is if you are fetching data, you use get. If you are creating data, you use post. If you are updating data, you use either put or patch. And then if you're deleting data, you use delete, of course. So that's, again, specified in the API level. You would have to read their documentation to figure out what they did. But in this case, it is a GET request. And now what we want to do is we want to just grab this URL right over here and just paste that in there. So let's go ahead and format this a little bit better. And that's pretty much all it is that you need to do in order to fetch the data. However, what we need to do is, well, we need to kind of modify this in a few ways. So the first thing that we want to do is, you can see here the query is hard-coded to always be Office. We need to make this dynamic so that, you know, whenever somebody goes to our application and then searches for a specific topic, they can go ahead and search for it within this query right here. So I'm going to create a new variable, new piece of state. I'm going to call this term, and initially I'm going to make it an empty string. And then over here I'm going to turn this to a template literal. And then right about here where it says Office, I'm going to do a quick little check. I'm going to say, okay, well, if you have something for term, then use that. Or if you don't have anything for term, then I accept Office. So by default, when somebody loads the application, we give them a bunch of Office pictures. But however, if they have something for term, we can go ahead and update that. So that's what we're going to do. And the next thing that we also need to do is we need to store the response in some sort of state as well. So let's go right over here and we're going to say let photos, we're going to say photos is going to be equal to an array. And then right about here, we're going to say photos, we're going to say that that is going to be equal to response dot, and I'm going to say dot data dot results. So that's how the object comes back to us. So response.data.results. We're going to store them right over here. So let's go ahead and console.log both term and photos just to see how this is working. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go to inspect and I'm going to go to console. And if you were to take a look at this, you can see that they are still in their default state. And of course, if I were to type something like elephant and were to click search, nothing is happening. Now, why is that? Well, that's because we are not using this function at all. We need to go ahead and utilize this function. Now, there's two cases where we want to utilize this function. The first case is, of course, when somebody goes ahead and searches and then clicks the search button. We want to call this function so we can update our photos. But the other case is as soon as our application loads, we also want to call this function to fetch all of the Office data, which is going to be our default. So those two cases are things that we're going to have to discuss how to do within our application. And we're going to start with fetching the data on load. Now, before we do that, TypeScript is complaining a little bit. If you were to hover over it, you can see here that we haven't specified a type for our array, which means that it doesn't really understand what's going to be inside of this array. You know, is it going to be a number? Is it going to be a string? Is it going to be an object? So what we need to do is we need to tell it that this is going to be an object, an array of objects, and each object is going to have an ID that is going to be a string. And how do I know this? Well, I've fetched the data from the data or from the endpoint, and you can see here that we have an ID that's going to be a string. Now there's a bunch of other properties, but we only care about some of the properties that we're going to utilize. So let's just use types for that. And we're going to say an alt description that is also going to be a string. And then lastly, the URLs, that's going to be an object. So as you can see here, zoom in, we have an alt description. Again, we have more, but we're not going to utilize them, so let's not specify the types for them. There's URLs that is going to be an object, and we're just going to use the regular one. So we're going to say regular, and that's going to be string. All right. And then this, of course, is specifying that it's going to be an object. Now to specify it's going to be an array of those objects, we just say an array like that. Now TypeScript is not complaining. Anyways, that pretty much does it. Now let's go ahead and try to fetch our data on mount. In order to fetch data as soon as our application has loaded, we need to learn about lifecycle hooks in Svelte. Now there are 4 lifecycle hooks that we are going to discuss, although we're only going to use one. And that is on mount, on before update, on after update, as well as on destroy. Now these are hooks that are going to run pieces of code that we specified when a certain action occurs within our application. So for example, the on mount hook is going to run code that we have specified as soon as our application mounts. The before update hook is going to run before something updates within our application. After update is going to run code that we have specified, for example here, a console.log, after something has updated within our application. And as you can imagine, on destroy is when some sort of component within our application is leaving our UI, we can run this hook. Now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the on mount hook. As soon as our application is loaded, we want to run some piece of code. So it's going to look something like this. We're just going to say on mount. We're going to go ahead and import it from Svelte. Then we're going to say on mount. And then within it, we're going to specify a callback function. And then within that callback function is all of the code that we want to run. Now, specifically, what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is fetch the data. So let's go ahead and accomplish this. So I'm going to go over here. I am going to import, and then I'm going to import it from Svelte. And I'm going to import on mount. And let's go right over here, and I'm going to say on mount. So on mount, I am going to just console.log, hello there. So hello there, just to see if it works. So I'm going to go ahead and format this. And let's go back to our application now, which is right here. And you can see we get a hello there. So you can see there we have this hello. Now if I use another hook, for example, on destroy, and I did a goodbye, for example, we're not going to see it because we're not really destroying anything within our application. There's no component, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that is being removed. So you can see here we don't have the goodbye there. Now, of course, we can use other hooks like the after update as well as before update. Over here, let's just go ahead and render those as well. So we're going to say before update. And we're going to say console.log I ran before the, I'm going to say before the app updated. And then over here, we're going to have an after update. I ran after the app updated. Now, as soon as our application is rendered, our app is being changed. So this is running before it has our application was rendered, and then this, of course, ran after. And then you can see here that you can let's look at the order here. So this ran the very first thing, and then the after update ran, and then the on mount ran. So now what we can do is we can utilize these hooks for our advantage. For example, as soon as our application has mounted, I'm going to go ahead and just call the fetch data function. So now if I were to refresh the application, our application should be in a state where we have fetched that data and we have updated it right over here within our photos. So let's go ahead and iterate over the photos because we know exactly how this data is going to look. And we're just going to render those photos instead of having this kind of hard-coded structure right here. Now we have learned exactly how to iterate over an array of things. So we say each like so. So we're going to say each, and then over here, we're going to close this off with each like that. Then in here, we're just going to have one HTML element. We're going to say photos as photo. And then we're also going to specify the index just so we can get it. And then lastly, over here, let's specify some sort of unique key, which is going to be the photo ID. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So over here, what we can do now is utilize, let's go here. We're going to not hard code the source anymore. So we're going to say photos dot, we'll say URLs dot regular. And then here we shall say photo dot alt description. And that should do it. So let's zoom out of here a little bit. What am I doing? I just want to format the document. There we go. And that should do it. So now if I were to go right here, you can see we get a bunch of different pictures of the office. So now our application is fetching data as soon as we are mounting our app. And of course, what it's doing is it's grabbing the data from this API, and then it's setting it to our variable right over here, which was an empty array, but now it's an array filled with images, and we can go ahead and render all of these different images. So that about does it for the mounting. But now, of course, what we need to do is we need to have the search. So let's go ahead and accomplish that in the next video. In this video, we're going to refetch our data whenever somebody puts in a specific term and then clicks the search button. So again, if I want elephants, I'm going to search for elephants right over here. And I'm going to go ahead and click search. And then what this should do, of course, is update our images to show elephants. So how are we going to do that? Well, you might be thinking, oh, this is extremely simple. And in reality, it is, but you're probably going to miss one step. You're probably going to go ahead and add a handler to this button. So I'm going to say on click, and then we can say that this is going to call a function called handle search or something like that. You can call whatever it is that you want. And then over here, what we're going to do is we're just going to say handle search, and that's going to be an arrow function. We're going to mark this as async. And you might be thinking, oh, very, very easy stuff. All I have to do is fetch this data like so. So fetch data, and then of course, let's just remove the async because we're not really using the await. Now, this is going to fetch the data. And if I were to go ahead and click on elephant, of course, elephant, and click on search, it's going to make an HTTP request to our Unsplash endpoint. And to kind of prove this to you, you can see here, we're making that HTTP request. However, nothing is updating. Now, why is that? Well, that's the reason why is because the query is always office. So what we need to do is whenever we change our input, so whenever we type something, we also need to change that term, because right now, as you can see, it's always an empty string, and thus we're hard coding office all the time. So how do we do this? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to bind this input element to this piece of state. And we're going to do it in a way where it's two-way binded, which means that anytime that I update the state, well, the input is going to update its value. And anytime that we update the value within the input is also going to update the state itself. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So let's go ahead and accomplish it first, and then I think you're going to understand exactly what two-way binding is. So over here, we are going to say bind, and then we're going to say we want to bind the value of this input to be equal to the term. So I'm going to say bind the value of this input to the term pieces of state. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just render the term right above it. So now if I were to change this to elephant, let me zoom in here, you can see that the piece of state is also being updated. So you can see me changing the value of this input is changing the value of the state. All right, so that's the binding one way. So this is again, me changing the value of the input is changing the value of the state. So we're binding the state to the value of the input. So that's the one of the two-way binding. But also, if I were to change the state, then it's going to change the value of the input. So and to prove that to you, I'm going to go ahead and just create a button. And I'm going to say, I don't know, I'll call this clear, for example. And I'll have an on-click handler, on-click. And I'm going to call a callback function that very simply is just going to say term is equal to an empty string. All right. So let's go ahead and just say elephant. So now, again, our state is elephant. Now I'm going to go ahead and clear this. And this has nothing to do with the input. I'm not touching the input altogether. I'm just clearing this piece of state. And you can see now, because I've changed the state, it also changed it within the value. So that right there is two-way binding, a very, very important concept to understand. All right, so that's exactly what we did. All we have to do to two-way bind is just say bind value term. And now what we can do is right over here within our search, I can just say something like, you know, if the term is nothing, let's just not make an HTTP request, because right now that's exactly what we're doing. So we're just going to return early because we've already fetched all the data that we need within the onMount hook. Now, if, however, somebody did put a term, then what we want to do is we want to fetch the data. And I'm going to mark this as async, and then over here we're going to go ahead and await this because I want to run some code right under it. Now, what's the code that I want to run? Well, once we have fetched our data and everybody's happy, I want to clear the term so that we can, you know, go and easily create another search. And let me just show you what I mean by that. So now what we can do is we can search for elephant, and let me go ahead and remove this as well. So let's search for elephant, and it should work this time because it should make that HTTP request, which is going to update our data. There we go. So you can see we are getting our data. And now what we can do here is if I want to search for something else, you can see I would have to clear my input manually and then search for lion. Probably not the best experience. I think it should just clear right away, and that's the powers of two-way binding. So now what we can say is the term is equal to nothing. Where are we here? Term is equal to nothing. And now if I were to search for tiger, right? Now you can see I can search for something else very, very easily. I can search for horse now without having to remove tiger. And there we go. So that pretty much should do it for our application. The last little thing that I would like to do is, you know, make this the fetching of the data a little bit nicer. Because right now you can see here, if I were to search for a jaguar, and part of my spelling here, if I were to search for a jaguar and there's no jaguars there, I spelled it incorrectly. It's just for a tree. You can see it's kind of abrupt and it just kind of pops in there. Whereas in the final version, you can see that we get this really cool effect for every single search. So we're going to learn exactly how we can do this with Svelte, and it's pretty easí and it's remarkably easy. So let's go ahead and do that. In this section, what we are going to do is learn how we can animate within Svelte, and it is remarkably easy to do. The first thing that we need to do is first identify which elements we want to animate. And of course, it's going to be the image elements because those are the only things that are moving around. So that is what we want to do. So now that we got that out of the way, we then have to specify how we want them to animate. So what we can do here is at the very top, we can import a few things. So I'm going to say import from Svelte/transition, and we can import a bunch of different ways that we can animate our elements. So for example, there's fade, there's fly, there's let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at all the other ones that they have. I believe there's more out there, but I'm not 100% sure exactly what there is. But what we're going to utilize is fade and fly. So fly is going to animate an element, you know, it's kind of going to fly into our viewport. So maybe from like top to bottom, and then fade is just going to kind of fade things out. So let's go ahead and accomplish this. I'm going to go to the image tag, and then over here we have to tell it how we want it to animate in and how we want it to animate out. So we're going to say in, and we're going to utilize fly, and then we're going to specify some an object that's going to configure everything. So I'm going to say y initially is going to be 200, and then what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of fly in back to the original y, which is 0, in 2 seconds or 2000 milliseconds. So that should do it for our animation. So if I were to go right over here and refresh the page, you can see it's at 200, and now it's kind of going to 2 within, or it's at 200, it's going to 0 within 2 seconds. And if I were to search for something else like elephant again, and then search, you can see we get that animation. However, we're not really getting that nice staggered effect. So what we can do here is we can add a delay, and then we can say that, hey, we want to delay each element. And in order to kind of get that staggered effect, we can just say the index of the element times 200. And that's going to give us kind of that staggered effect, which is much, much neater. So now if I were to search for garden, for example, we still get that really nice staggered effect. All right, so that's fading in. Of course, we can also, or animating in. Of course, we can also animate out. So we can say out, and we can say fade for this. And for this, we don't really have to specify any, we could if we want to, but I'm not going to. So now we can kind of fade out as well. And you might not be able to see this, but you know, it faded out a little bit. You can see that it faded out, and then the other one's animated in. So that about wraps it up for this project. And then, well, in the next few videos, we're going to tackle our final project. But hopefully at this point, you're learning quite a bit about Svelte. All right, everybody, we have completed 2 projects. In this video, we're going to move on to the final boss, the hardest but most sophisticated project that we are going to build in this course. And of course, that is the quiz application. So you can see here within our quiz application, right now we have 2 cards that are going to give us quizzes for either chemistry or biology. But of course, we can add more if we want to. Now, a user can go ahead and click on any one of these cards. So we're going to go and click on chemistry, for example, and it's going to redirect us to a completely different page. So the URL has changed. Now what we can do here is we can answer these questions. And of course, you can see here we have this dynamic state depending on how we are answering these questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. And when I click submit, it tells us which ones are right, which ones are wrong. So all of the other answers were wrong. This one over here was correct. And you can see right over here, we get this green light dot that tells us this is the progress of our application. We can then move on. This time, let's get it wrong. I'm going to get this one here. You can see here that I got the wrong option, and then you can see this was the correct one. Now what we can do is once we finish our quiz, this was only a 2-question quiz. We can move on to next, and it's going to tell us our score, and we can, of course, go back to the quiz page. So this is what we are going to build. It's going to have a lot of different things, but also a lot of the same things that we have learned. Now, of course, in order to build this, we're going to need to create a, well, you guessed it, a Svelte app. And that's exactly what I did. I did this off screen because we've already done this a million times and I kind of don't want to waste your time. So go ahead and create a new Svelte app. And now if you forget, what I highly suggest you do is just do a quick Google search. So just say Svelte and then create app. So we're going to go over here and we're going to go right over here. And if you look at the command, there you go. That's the command to create a Svelte app. And I created it with TypeScript. So I highly suggest that you do the exact same. So there we go. So we have created our Svelte application. And just for this lecture, what I would like to do is start building the UI, at least for this page right here. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So of course, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our routes directory. We're going to move into our page.svelte file. And of course, I'm running my Svelte application. So I did an npm install as well as an npm run dev. And we're going to overall change the UI structure of our application. Now, I don't want to add these styles the way that we have been adding the styles thus far. Instead, what I would like to do is add some sort of styling library that is really going to accelerate the styling and the speed of our coding for us. Now, which library do I want to select? Well, I want to select Tailwind. So Tailwind is a really good library. Let's go ahead and just do a quick little Google search here. I'm going to say Tailwind. And in case you're unfamiliar with Tailwind, I'm going to just say CSS. It's a really, really good library for implementing basically all the styles that we are already familiar with. Let's just zoom in here. But we can add them within our classes. So for example, over here, we have, this background color. We can just add this background color right here. If you want this to be rounded, we would just add the rounded class. If you want some padding, we would say padding 8. And it just makes things a lot simpler and faster. So what I would like to do is integrate Tailwind within our application. So let's go ahead and do a Google search and see how that's done. So I'm going to say Tailwind CSS Svelte. So we're going to go over here. And it says the first thing that we need to do, of course, is, let me just zoom in here. The first thing that we need to do is we need to, of course, create our Svelte application. We've already done that, so we don't have to worry about that. And now what we need to do is we need to install some dependencies. So we need to install Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, as well as Auto Prefixer. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, and let's go right here. Let's see, do a quick copy. There we go. I got a new keyboard, so I'm kind of testing out all of the different commands here. They're kind of confusing me, to be quite honest. So let's go over here, and we're going to install these dependencies onto this quiz application. So we're going to do a Control V like so, and let's install them. Now while we're at it, we're going to move back. So once we have installed it, what we're going to do is initialize a Tailwind application within our Svelte app. So I'm going to go right about here. We're going to copy that as well. We're going to initialize a Svelte application or a Tailwind application within our Svelte app. And as soon as we do that, we should get some sort of tailwind.config.json file or .js file. And there we go. So we have that right here. So we got the post CSS config. We also have the Tailwind config. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is move on right over here. So it's saying that within our Svelte config, we have to copy this command. So let's go ahead and do that, or import this. So where's our Svelte config? We have our Vite processor, and we have to add that right over here, preprocessor. And as you can see, that's already done for us, so we do not have to worry about that. And then what we need to do is we need to configure all of the paths that we want to utilize Tailwind in within the created tailwind.config.cjs. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. And I am going to go to right here. And honestly, let's just go ahead and just copy the whole content. And we're going to paste that in there. All right. So that's looking pretty good thus far. And now what we need to do is we need to add the Tailwind directives to the app.css. So this is going to add all of the different styles that we want. So now let's go to our app.css file. So our app.css file, where does that live? So what we can do here is we can do a very quick Control P and search for our app.css file. It does not seem like we have one, so we have to create that app.css file instead. So let's go over here. We're going to say app.css. We're going to paste everything in there. And then what we're going to do is we are going to import that into our layouts.svelte file. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, exactly what this file is. But now let's just go ahead and create it and import this in. So let's go right over here. I'm going to copy this file name for now. we're going to go into our routes directory and we're going to create this. Now, if you don't understand what this is, don't worry. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this in and paste that in there like so. And we're going to also paste this in there. All right, so it's looking pretty good. It's quite happy now. And of course, now what we want to do is we want to start our application. So let's go ahead and just restart our app. We have already started it. Let's just restart it now. So I'm going to go here, do a Control C, and we're going to do a npm run dev again. And now we should have Tailwind configured. So let's go to our application, and you can see our application, the styles is a little bit different. And now what we can do is we can go to our page.svelte file, and we can say, for example, class, and we can say a BG blue of, let's say, 400, and also let's make it rounded, and also let's add, a little bit of a shadow. And if I were to go ahead and save that, and now go to my application, you can see now we get the styles. So yes, indeed, we do have Tailwind configured. Now with Tailwind configured, what we can go ahead and do is start building our application a lot faster. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. Let us now move on and build the home page of our application. So let's go to our code here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the page.svelte file. And over here, we're going to add a bunch of different HTML in order to get this overall structure right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to get rid of this. And we're just going to wrap everything inside of a div. We're going to give it a class. And we're going to give this a class of quizzes container. Quizzes container like so. Now this is just for kind of documentation purposes. This class is not really going to do anything. Now over here, these other classes are going to do stuff. So I'm going to give it a width of 700 pixels like so. And we're also going to give it a M of auto. We're going to give it a flex. We're going to give it a justify center, and we're also going to give it an H screen, so it can be as tall as your screen. And then as well as that, we're also going to do an items center. So let's go ahead and give that a very quick save. And there we go. Now we have our div. Now our div, we should have a closing tag for our div. So let's go ahead and close that off here. And now within this div, we're going to add even more content. So of course we have to add our cards. So let's go and create this card component. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say div, and we're going to give this a class of, let's say, just for documentation purposes, so we know exactly what this is. We're going to say quiz card, and then we're going to give it a shadow. We're going to give it a width of 250 pixels. And then what we're going to do is we're going to also give it a rounded, an overflow hidden like so. And lastly, we're going to say cursor pointer, because we want to point to this so that we can go ahead and redirect us to a different page. And also let's give it a margin of 2. So that's going to be the quiz card. Now within this, of course, we're going to have an image. Now this image, for now, what we'll do is we'll just give it a class of H44. But of course, we have to deal with the source. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's give it a closing tag as well. And then lastly, let's add another div. We're going to give this a, we're going to give it flex, items, center, and then we're also going to give it a justify of content. And apologies for my typing. This is a new keyboard and I'm not really used to it. And actually, this is going to be justify between. And then over here, we're going to say padding Y of 3 as well as padding X of 2. All right. And then the last bit of HTML, we're going to have an H1 here. We're going to make this a font bold. And then over here, we're going to add the quiz name. Let's just write now, for now, hard code chemistry. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a p tag. And then over here, we're going to say how many questions we have. For now, we'll hard code questions. All right. So let's go ahead and give that a quick little save. And let's go and grab just some sort of chemistry picture so we can have that as well. So I'm going to say chemistry here. And I'm going to just grab this image. I'm going to right click on this image right here. And we are going to copy this image address. And I am going to just paste it in there. Hopefully it's not too long. And you know what? It wasn't that long. So let's go ahead and give that a quick little save now. Let's just see how overall the structure of our application looks like. That looks pretty good to me. This is pretty incredible. All right, so this is fine, but what I would like to do is I would like to get some somewhat real data. Now, the data that we are going to be utilizing within our application is going to come from just from our GitHub directory. So I'm going to go to GitHub right over here. And if you go to my GitHub repository, which again, I will link in the description below, if you were to go to the quiz application, and let me zoom in here a little bit for you guys. If you were to go to the source and then to the data.json, I just have a bunch of quiz data that we can add here. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab this data, and I'm going to just paste that into our data.json that's going to be within the source directory. So I'm going to say data.json. I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. So let's go and paste that in there. Let's do a quick little save. That looks pretty good to me. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over this data. And then once we iterate over this data, we're going to render each card dynamically. Now we also need to grab another thing, and that's going to be the image.ts file. And the reason why I added this is because the image URLs were so incredibly long, and I did not want to add them within our JSON file because they're just so long. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that. And we're going to create an image.ts file as well in here. So I'm going to say image.ts. We're going to paste these images in. And as you can see, incredibly long. Like they're really long. So that's why I just wanted to kind of separate them into their own little file. All right, so we got that in there. So now what we would like to do is go to our page.svelte file. And within the script, we're just going to import that data in. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say script. And then over here, and we can also specify the language, even though we're not really using this. We can specify that this is TypeScript. And then over here, what I want to do is I want to import, and I would like to say I want to import the quizzes. I'm going to say from, and then I'm going to say data.json. And now what I would like to do is iterate over these quizzes, and then for each quiz, I would like to render this card. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to grab this, and of course, in order to do this, we're going to have to wrap this with an each. Remember, we've done this before. So we're going to say each, and we're going to say quizzes. And we're going to say as quiz. We're going to provide it with the quiz.id. So this is going to be the key for the iteration. Now remember, if you were to go to our data.json, you can see here that we have a unique ID that I created. Now let's go back over here. So where does this end? This ends here. We're going to have to close off that each. So remember, that's very important to do. All right, so now if I were to go ahead and save this and go back to the app, let's go here. You can see that we get these kind of two static cards. Now, of course, we don't want that. We want this to be a little bit more dynamic. So let's go ahead and, well, make it dynamic. So within this card right over here, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this data and just kind of plop it in there. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is we are going to, let's just see the number of questions that we have. Let's make that dynamic. So if we were to look at our data, you can see here that we have an object, and we have the question, and then we have, it's an array. So over here, you can see that we have one question that's an object, and then another question that's an object. So what we can do is to to determine the number of questions, we can say something like quiz, and let's redo this. We're going to say quiz dot, we're going to say questions, and then we're going to say dot length. So let's go ahead and save that in there. And if I were to go back, I can already see an error, and that's the error is I kind of overrode this closing tag. So let's go ahead and save that in there now. And now you can see here we have 2 questions, 1 question. So you can see that the dynamic nature of this is working now. So let's go over here. And over here, we're going to say quiz.name. Let's save that. Now we have chemistry and biology. The last thing that we need to change is the image. Now, in order to change the image, we need to import the object from the image.ts file. So I'm going to say import everything as images. I'm going to say I want that from the image.ts file, like so. So remember here we have an image.ts file, and I'm going to go ahead and give that a quick little save. Now it's complaining to me saying that this is declared but never read, blah, blah, blah. Now why is it? It's still complaining because the image.ts file does not live in the root directory. It lives right here. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And now what we can do is we can kind of copy what we got here. And instead of hard coding the source, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that. We're going to use curly braces, and I'm going to say images. And then all we have to do is just provide the image URL. So over here, we're going to say quiz dot, and if you were to go to our JSON file, you can see here that this is the image URL. And what it's going to do is it's going to correspond to this right over here, which is going to be this URL. All right, so we're going to say quiz dot image URL. Let's give that a very quick save now. Let's see how that looks. So it's complaining to me. It's saying that this has an implicit of any. That's just a TypeScript error. You don't have to worry about that for now. But there we go. So now you can see that we have these 2 different cards. So this is looking pretty good. However, there is one thing that I would like to change from a structure perspective. And that has to do with this or these HTML elements right over here. Let's go ahead and talk about that in the next lecture. In this video, what we're going to do is learn about a very, very important concept known as components. So in order to understand components, let's look at the code that we have written thus far. So you can see that within our page.svelte file, we have this div, and what this div is doing is just kind of encapsulating all of our different cards. And as you can see here, this is the HTML for our cards, and all of the logic as well as the imports that we need are living inside of the page.svelte file. Personally, I don't like this. What I would like to do is I would kind of like to encapsulate all of the card logic into its own file and then somehow import it into the page.svelte, because our application is going to grow and we're going to have multiple different components within our application, and this is going to make our file really, really big. And this is a fundamental concept to front-end development. We should separate our HTML structure into separate files and import them where we need to. Now, in order to do that, luckily, it is very, very easy. All we have to do is go to our source directory, and within our source directory, we're going to create a component directory or a components directory, and then in here, we're going to create a component, and I'm going to call this card, and typically it's a capital case. I'm going to say card.svelte, and it doesn't have that fancy one. We're just going to say card.svelte like so. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to grab all of this HTML, and then I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Let's go ahead and just paste it in there. Let's do a quick little save. Now it's complaining a little bit because it doesn't know what this image stuff is. So just for now, I'm going to go ahead and just remove it altogether, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of call this chemistry. We're going to go ahead back to our hard-coded state, and then over here we're going to say 1, for example. So that right there is all it is that we need to do in order to separate our HTML file. Now, how in the world am I going to go ahead and kind of render this within our page.svelte? Well, this is what we are going to do. We're going to go right over here, and we're going to import that card components. So I'm going to say import card, and I'm going to say from, and then I'm going to say, well, we're going to move into the components directory. Let's go over here, components, and then / card.svelte. And what we can do now is treat this as regular HTML. So over here, instead of rendering all of this, you can see now what we can do is we can just kind of get rid of all that and just paste in the card as well, like so. We're going to paste in that card. Oops, let's go here. I'm trying to have the closing braces, but it's not really working out here with this new keyboard. My goodness, what is going on? Come on, what is the closing braces? That does not look like the closing brace. All right, let's just try one more time. We're going to say card dash. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and give that a quick little save here. And now if I were to go back to the application, you can see now we are rendering that same exact structure. Now, of course, there's no image, and that's because we hard coded the image as an empty string, but you can see the structure is still there. So that is really, really great. We can keep this file as lean as possible and kind of have all of our different logic within these component files. Now, the issue is what we need to do is we need to kind of pass data into each component, because we need to pass the image data, we need to pass the name data, as well as the number of questions data. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is how we're going to do that. We're going to go right over here, and you can see we are still doing this kind of iteration. So now what we're going to do is within this HTML or this component, I'm going to go right over here, and I'm going to do curly braces and then quiz. And what this is going to do is pass all of that quiz data into our card. So I'm going to go and give that a quick little save here. And now within our card, let's go right over here, we can accept that data. And we're going to accept that data within the script tag. So we're going to say script, we're going to say lang of ts. And then over here, what we're going to do is in order to accept that data, we're going to say export let quiz. So we're going to export in the quiz that we have passed in. Now this is complaining to us because we're using TypeScript, and what we should do is we should define the type of this quiz. So let's go ahead and quickly do that. Now to define the type of a quiz, and that what a type means is the overall data structure that we have here, which is going to be an object that contains an ID that's a number, a name that's a string, a URL that's a string, question that is going to be an array of objects that has an ID, a question, and an option. So let's go ahead and just quickly define that. And we're going to define that with an interface. So I'm going to say interface quiz, and I'm going to say it has an ID that is a number, and we have a name that is a string, and we have an image URL. And this, instead of hard coding it as a string, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, and we're going to get this, we're going to cut this out, and we're going to paste that back into our Svelte, or into the card, because this is where really we're going to use it. And we're going to say that this is going to be a type of the image object. So we're going to say, so we're going to grab the keys of this image object, and we're going to say type of images like so. All right, so that does that. And now what we are going to do, and let's just do a quick little save here. Now this is complaining to us because, well, of course, I believe we have to move back a few directories. So let's go here. Let's see where we can find this image directory. So it's no, it's right here. So I guess we're fine. So now what we can do is we can just forget about it complaining. Now let's just define the other thing. So of course we have the questions. Now this is going to be an array of objects, and then each object is going to have a number. It's going to have a text that is a string, and it's also going to have an array of options, and that each option is also going to be an object that is going to have an ID that is a number. And then we're going to say a text that is a string. And lastly, a label that is a string as well. All right, let's go ahead and give that a quick little save. And now once I pass this data in, you can see it's not complaining anymore. So overall, the structure is going to look like this. So now let's go ahead and actually define that. So I'm going to say quiz like so. Go ahead and click that, give that a save. It is indeed complaining, and I believe it's complaining because we missed one thing. So we have the question, the ID, and of course we need to provide it with the answer. So over here, within the question, we're going to say answer. And this is going to be a string. So now it shouldn't complain anymore. And over here it says type string is not assignable to type chemistry or biology. That should not be the case because we did key of. Let's see here. So this import value is never used. Oh yeah, so we need to import it as a type. So let's just say, let's do a quick fix here. And we're going to convert to import type like so. Now this is still complaining. It's saying it's not assignable to chemistry or biology. You know what we're going to do? We're just going to grab this and we're going to paste that in there just so we can avoid this TypeScript annoyance. All right, so let's give that a quick save here. And I'm going to close this off. It's still yelling at us. I think it's fine if it yells at us. We'll kind of move on. There we go. You know what? That's fine. Let's move on here. So now what we did here is we passed our data. So we passed our data to this card component. And then within this card component, let's remove this type. We don't need this anymore because we're going to utilize it later. Within this card component, we're accepting that quiz. And then over here, now what we can do is we can pretty much do everything we've done before. So I can say images of quiz.image URL. All right. And then over here, I can do quiz.name. So quiz.name. And then over here, we can do also quiz.questions.length. So now let's give that a quick little save. If we were to go to our application, you can see now we're getting the exact same effect. However, now all of our logic is kind of interfaced into this one file instead of having it in this file. And this is a very fundamental concept in front-end development. In this video, what I would like to do is teach you all about pages. Now, in our Svelte application, we're going to have multiple different pages. And what I mean by that is currently right now, we are on the home page. And what I would like to do is make these cards clickable so that when I click on them, they redirect me to the quiz page. So let's go to the final version here, just so we can exactly see what I mean. Right now I'm in the final version. Yes, they do look identical. Now I'm going to go ahead and just copy the URL. Let me paste it in here. So this right here is the homepage URL. So we just have our domain, which is localhost 5174, and then we have nothing appended to it, just this kind of slash. This is the homepage. This is what we see as soon as we go to our application. However, when I click on a particular card, let's say chemistry, you can see here I get redirected to this page. And this page looks something like this. This is how the URL looks. So it's /quiz and then specifically /quiz/ that quiz's ID. So in this case, that quiz's ID is 1. So over here you can see 1. So this right here is a brand new page with a brand new route. Now there's also another page in this application that I haven't really talked about, and that is the About page. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to go to /about. And as you can see here, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's zoom in. You can see all it does is just say About. But it's just a brand new page that has a brand new URL. So this is what we want to add into our application. So let's go back over here. We want to add, well, we have right now this route page, this root page rather, But what we want to eventually have is a root page, an about page, just so we can have an about information. And then we also want a /quiz /dynamic ID page. This part right here is dynamic. And we're going to do this with Svelte relatively easily. So let's begin with the about page, because this is static and not dynamic, a lot less complicated. So let's go ahead and try to accomplish that. All right, so let's go to our Svelte application. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. And we are going to go right over here. And we're going to go to our routes directory. Now you can see within the routes directory, we have a plus page.svelte. So whenever we have a plus sign, this is a very special file that Svelte is going to recognize. So it's going to say, oh, plus, and then it's going to say, oh, page. That means this is a page that we need to route. And this is the same thing for the layout. So over here, plus layout, and then it's going to understand, oh, this is a layout file, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So now what we want to do is we want to create another page.svelte file, plus page.svelte file, but we want to specifically have it so that the route is /about. And how do we do that? Well, this plus page.svelte file, we know for a fact is our root application. So the root homepage. So just / like so. Well, as you can see, it's also the root file within the routes directory. So if I wanted to add another plus page.svelte with a /about route, what I would do is I would create inside of the routes directory an about directory. So we're going to go over here. We're going to create an about directory. And then within this about directory, we're going to create another plus page.svelte. So plus page.svelte. So now this is inside of the about directory, and thus the route is going to be /about/ and then that's it. Then it's going to render this page.svelte file. And it's pretty much that simple. There's no if or buts about it. So over here, we can just render whatever it is that we want. Let's go ahead and just render that about. And we're not going to put any content in here. We're just going to have something like this. And now what we can do is we can go to our app. And if we were to go to /about, you can see right there we have that about page. How cool is that? And that's pretty much all it is to it. So now let's go and build the other thing, which is a little bit more complicated. And what I mean by the other thing is this page right over here, /quiz /dynamic ID. Now it's a little bit more complicated, but it's also not that complicated. So over here we have two routes. So we have the route of /quiz and then dynamic ID. So dynamic ID, whatever that is. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is create a directory called quiz. And now because we have another route that we want within this quiz directory, we're going to have to create another directory. Now because that this is dynamic, what we can do here is we can specify the directory with square brackets. And then inside of it, we can just call it whatever it is that we want. I'm going to call it ID. So over here, now what we have is a route that is going to be /quiz /anything. So it could be /1, /4, /6, /whatever. It could be anything it is that we want. Now to go ahead and solidify this, we're going to go and create a .page.svelte file. So we're going to say .page.svelte, and we're going to go right over here. We're going to grab this. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's undo this. We're going to go ahead and save that. Save this. And let's go back to this page. And we're just going to create a div. We're going to say this is the quiz page. Quiz page. So let's go ahead and give this a quick test. So now if I were to go, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you guys can see what's going on here. If I were to go to /quiz and then / literally anything else, so like let's just say 444, you can see here that I get redirected to this page. And that is how we create pages in Svelte. We just add folders that match our route path, our page path within the routes directory. And then whenever we want a page, we would add a plus page.svelte file. In this video, we are going to talk about that layouts file that I kept hinting we will talk about later. So in order to understand exactly what the layout file is doing, let's address a current problem in our application. So I'm going to go back to the root directory, and you can see within the root directory, everything is centered in the middle of the page. However, when I go to another route, like for example, the about route, you can see that the content right over here is to the top left. And same thing is true of the quiz page. You can see everything is to the top left. But what I would like to have is everything to be centered, every single page, to have its content centered in the middle of the page. So this is what I could do. I can go to the Svelte file, this Svelte file right over here that is housing the root application, and I can grab this div that is encapsulating the content, and I can go over here and kind of just paste it in there, and I can do the exact same thing right here. So I can add a div. Let's add an h1. And then let's also add some real content in here. So quiz page. And then over here, we can, of course, close it off. So let me go ahead and save that, and then save this as well. And let's get rid of this. And now if I were to go to the application, you can see that everything is nice and centered within the app. So we got the about, we got the quiz page, and then lastly, we have this right over here. Now this is all fine and dandy, and this is a valid approach. However, right now we are duplicating our code throughout multiple different pages. And what if our designer was like, you know what, we can't have this be a white background. It needs to be some sort of blue background, because maybe that leads to a better user experience. So for example, now what we would have to do is go over here to the class and add something like BG, and we'll say blue of 400. I'm going to go ahead and save that. So let's go and save that. And then I'm going to go to this application. Maybe this is what they want. However, now when I go to the about page, you can see here that this is not blue. So what I would have to do is copy this style and then go over here to this page as well as this page right here, or not the layouts, the other Svelte file. Where is that? I believe it's this one. Or nope, it's not that one either. Where are you? Let's just close everything off. It's not in here. So let's go to the about. We'd have to go to this Svelte file as well, and then add that class. So we would save here as well as here. And now we have that style that is going to be consistent across all of our different pages. But you can see that this is a hassle. And of course, as the application grows, this is going to be unmaintainable. Because now, let's say the designer was like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty terrible, we have to remove it. Now we have to go ahead and just remove it from every single file manually. This isn't very good, and it's not very dry. Remember, the core principle of programming is keeping our code as simple and dry as possible. We do not want to repeat ourselves. So this is what we're going to do instead. We're going to utilize the layout.svelte file. So you can see here that this looks like a very, very normal file, except we have this thing right here, which is called slot. And this is a component that is going to render the page of the route that we are in. So right now we are in the quiz route. So what this slot is ultimately going to be is a component that is going to render all of this HTML. Now, if I were to change this to /about, the slot is going to detect that, and instead of rendering the Svelte file, or the Svelte file, this Svelte file, it's going to render this Svelte file, as you can see here. And to prove this to you, we can actually comment this out. And if I were to comment this out, we shouldn't really render anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this. And now no matter where we go, we're not rendering a thing. So you can see that this is what the slot is doing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that. And we can take advantage of this. So what we can do is we can wrap our slot with that div that we have just created. So I can go over here and I can just wrap that slot right over here. And if I were to do that, we get the exact same effect that we had over here. So what we can do is remove this div now. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of save it and remove it. And you can see that we still have everything centered, even though we don't have our div in our page.svelte file. But we do have it in the slot. So now what we're rendering is this div and then the slot, which is going to contain this content. And let's go back to the about. So I'm going to say /about. The about is the exact same thing. So now what we can do here is remove this div, save that. And if I were to save this again or refresh, you can see that that's all fine and dandy. And then over here, we can do the exact same thing. And there we go. Now, if I were to go to the /quiz page, /quiz/404, you can see that we get that exact same effect. And now if we need to make any sort of changes to our center container, like change its color, what we can do is we can do a very quick, go to our layout, do BG blue 400, give that a quick little save. And now when I go back to my application, you can see that it's blue here. I can go over here, it's blue, and over here it's blue. So I have to make just one code change and it affects every single page. And that right there is the power of the layout.svelte file. It defines the HTML that is needed, as well as the styles, as well as some script tags that we want to run as soon as we render our application within our whole app and every single page. Right now, the only way to move across pages is to change the URL directly. So I would have to change the URL to /quiz/quizid to get to this page. Now this is, of course, not the best user experience because the user probably has no idea what URLs and what routes belong to our page. Instead, what we want our user to do is to click on some UI, and that is going to redirect us to our page. Specifically for our case, I want them to click on either one of these cards, and it's going to redirect them to the /quiz/that quiz's ID page. So let's go ahead and accomplish this. We're going to go to our card component because that's eventually what we want to utilize in order for us to navigate. So we're going to go to this card component, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this whole thing in a button. So I'm going to say button just to make it nice and clickable. Now, luckily, what Tailwind does is it doesn't really apply a lot of styling to the button. So you can see here it looks exactly the same, but now we have this button right over here. Now what we can do to this button, and actually instead of having a div within a button, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of copy this class right over here, cut it out, put it onto the button. We're going to get rid of this div just so we don't have that unnecessary extra div. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now within this button, I'm going to add a click handler. So I'm going to have an on click. We've seen this before. So we're going to say on click. And what we're going to do is we're going to call a very special function called go to. And we're going to import that from the $app. Let me go ahead and just explain what I mean here. So we're going to get that from $app/navigation. So these are just a bunch of different methods that we can go ahead and utilize for our application. So if we want something for our store, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we would say $app/store. But what we want is we want navigation, and we specifically want this go to function. So now what we can do here is we can go ahead and call that. And we can say what we want you to do is we want you to go to, and then we can specify the route. So we can say /quiz. And right now I'm just going to go ahead and hard code the ID to 44. So if I were to save this and click on chemistry, now you can see we go to this page /quiz/44. Now this is all fine and dandy, but what I would like to do, of course, is I would like to make this dynamic. Now, luckily, we have the quiz information right over here because remember, we have the ID. So let's just use a template literal instead of utilizing a regular string. And we're just going to say here we want a $sign. Let's say $, curly braces. And we're going to say quiz.id, like so. Let's go ahead and give that a quick little save. And now if I were to click on biology, you can see we get redirected to quiz/2. And if I were to go back, now we get redirected to quiz/1. And this is how we implement navigation within our Svelte app. What I would like to do at this point is whenever we click on a specific card, instead of showing this generic quiz page H1, what I would like to do is show information about that particular quiz. So if I click on the chemistry quiz, it shows me information about that chemistry quiz. And then over here, if I click on biology, it shows me information about that biology quiz. Now, in order to figure out how to do this, we need to compare and contrast the two URLs. So whenever I go to the chemistry page, so I'm going to say chemistry, this is how the URL looks. So it looks something like this. Whenever I go to the biology page, well, this is how the URL looks, something like so. So the URL structure is overall the same, but of course, this portion is dynamic. And this portion is going to correspond to the ID of that particular quiz. So what we need to do is we need to extract this ID. So whatever page we're on, we have to extract this. So if we're on the chemistry page, it's going to be 1. If we're on the biology page, it's going to be 2. And then what we're going to need to do is traverse this data.json file. So let's go over here, traverse this data.json file, and then return the object that has the ID equal to the ID that we have extracted. So this is what we need to do. All right, so let's go ahead and accomplish that. Now that we know what we need to do, let's do it. So in order to do this, we're going to go to the routes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the quiz ID page right over here. And this is where we need to extract that ID. Now to do that, we need to create another file. So this file is going to be called the page.ts file. So let's go over here. And specifically, it's going to be called pluspage.ts so that we can associate that to our pluspage.svelte. And then this is just going to be a function. So we're going to export a function, and we're going to call this load. So this is a very important function. It has to be called load. And what it's going to do is it's going to load data as soon as we run this page, as soon as we render this page, it's going to call this function and then load whatever data that we return from this function into this file. So we're going to call it load. And then over here, we're going to go ahead and invoke that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add just a few little types over here. So I'm going to say, let's just add a comment here. Actually, you know what? Well, we won't do that for now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first try to find that particular quiz. Now, in order to do that, of course, we need to grab this URL. So remember, we need to grab the URL and we need to grab this dynamic portion of it specifically. So over here, luckily, the load function accepts the params. So these are going to be the query parameters. And over here, the query parameters is going to have this particular type. So it's going to be params. And then over here, it's going to be ID, because remember, we called this ID. And this is going to be a string. All right. So now what we can do here is we can say something like const quiz. And we're going to have to import the quizzes in. So we're going to say import, and we'll say quizzes from, and I'll say dot slot dot dot. We're going to go move back a directory, go to data.json. I'm going to say const quiz is equal to quizzes dot find. So I'm going to go ahead and find that. I'm going to say quiz, and then we're just going to say quiz dot id is equal to parse int, because this is a string. Even though it's a number, it always comes back to us as a string within its if it's a query parameter. And then we're going to say here params dot, and then we're going to say ID. So that's going to give us the quiz. Now what we can do is we can return that quiz. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to return that quiz. Let's save here. And now what we can do is we can extract that quiz from our file. So from this particular file. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a script tag. And all it is that we need to do in order to grab that quiz information is just say export let data. We're just going to give this a type of any for now. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And we're going to give that a type of any. And we have to annotate this as a, you know what? We'll annotate it as a TypeScript file. So we'll say lang is equal to ts. Let's go ahead and quickly save that. And now we have access to our data. So if I were to console.log over here, so I'm going to do a console.log of our data. I am going to, let's go here. We're going to go to the quiz. Now I'm on /quiz/2, so we should get data for the biology. So you can see we get this object, and there we go. So you can see we get this biology. And now over here, if I were to go to 1, you can see that we get chemistry. All right, so that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. So let's just do a quick little recap here. So whenever this page is rendered, what it's going to do is it's going to call this function within our pluspage.ts file, which is going to be the load function. Now the load function is going to grab the parameters that we have defined here, and then it's going to find that particular quiz and then return it. And then what we can do is we can grab whatever that load function is returning within our Svelte file from here. So this is just a nice, neat way of doing things. Now, one thing before we go and move on to the next lecture is what if the user somehow, some way, decided to go to /quiz/ I don't know, some random ID that doesn't really exist within our application. In that case, we get something like so. We get this kind of empty object. Now, of course, this is not what I want. Instead, what I would like to do is to kind of navigate them and throw some sort of 404 not found page. And we can do that. So let's go over here. Over here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick check. So we're going to say if the quiz does not exist. So we're going to say if the quiz does not exist, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and throw an error. Now what we can do here is we can import something. So we're going to go ahead and import, and specifically we're going to import something called error from Svelte itself. And this is going to be from @SvelteKit. And now what we can do here is we can say throw and then error, and then we can invoke this and specify the code, which is going to be a 404 code. So we'll say 404, and we'll also say something like quiz not found for the message. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now it's yelling at me over here. It's saying that this blah, blah, blah. Do you mean Svelte adapter? Oh, no, I did the wrong thing. I meant Svelte kit. That's what I meant. Apologies for that. So now let's go ahead and refresh. Now we're getting this error. We're getting a 404 not found error. So let me just go ahead and kind of show what that looks like to you. It says 404 quiz not found. Now, if I were to go to a quiz that is found indeed, of course, we go back to this quiz page. Now, what we can do now is traverse this data and just render whatever it is that we need instead of this generic quiz page. So over here, I can say something like, what can we say here? I can just say something like data dot question, or maybe data. Let's see what we have here. So data dot name. So I'm going to say data dot name. Go ahead and give that a quick little save. Now you can see we have chemistry. If I were to change that to 2, we have biology. If I were to change that to 3, we get a 404. All right, so we are really getting close. Now all it is that we need to do is start building out the rest of our components. So let's do that in the next few lectures. What I would like to do in this section is to start rendering some HTML content based on the data information that we have fetched. So let's begin with the question text, because as soon as you go to the application, let's just go to the final version here. As soon as you click on this, you get redirected to the very first question. We have this question text, and we also have these options. So let's go ahead and build out this overall HTML structure. And let's begin with the easiest thing, which is the question text itself. All right, so let's go over here. What I'm going to do is, instead of having all of our code here, you can see that we have multiple different components. We have this component, we have this component, this component, and this component. I think we should separate each one into its own file. So I'm going to go inside of this directory, and I'm going to create a components directory. And then within this, I'm going to create a question text.svelte file. So let's go ahead and create that. Now over here, what we are going to do is just define the overall HTML structure of that question. So I'm going to have a div in here, and then within it, we're going to have an h1. And for now, let's just hard code what is an SN2, and we're going to say reaction, like so. So what is an SN2 reaction? Now over here, I'm going to give it a class, and we're going to give it a shadow. We're going to give it a border with 4 pixels of length. We're also going to give it a padding of 3. We're going to make it nice and rounded. We're going to make the text nice and centered, v full, and then margin bottom of 5. Now, of course, to go ahead and render this, we're going to go back to that page.svelte file. And let's create a div with a v full or with a w full, which is going to ensure that this is 100%. And then in here, we can just go ahead and do a question text. Now notice something here. What we can do is we can auto import things in. So if I were to just click on this, you can see here that it has imported the question text from this route that we have defined. So let's go ahead and close that off, give it a quick save. And if I were to go back to my application, you can see here that we have this text. Now, of course, I don't want this to be hard-coded because right now I'm in the biology question. I'm getting this chemistry question. And then over here, if I go back to chemistry, I get this kind of hard-coded question as well. So no matter where I go, I get this question. And I do not want this to be hard-coded. So what are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to define a new piece of state. And this state is going to define the current question that we're on. So as soon as we render our application in the final version, the current question that we're on is the very first question. So we can go ahead and just submit that. And then when I click next, you can see here now we're on a new question, which is this question right over here. So we need to keep track of that state. So right over here, what we're going to do is we're going to define a new variable or a new piece of state. And let's do that under the let. And I'm going to say, I'll say current question index. So current question index. And initially we're going to set that. Oops. Oh my God. Again, I have to get used to this keyboard. Initially, we're going to set that to 0. All right. So that is looking pretty good. So now what we would like to do is we would like to get the question itself from the current question index. And we can do that, you might be thinking, by doing something like this. So I can say question is equal to current question index, or sorry, not current question index, by doing data.questions and then of current question index like so. So that is something that you think we can do. So let's go ahead and just show what's happening here. So I'm going to go ahead and just render the current question index. And I'm also going to render, let's say, the question dot text, or the question dot, I believe it's called name. Let's see what we got here. So yeah, it's called name. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's go back to our app. So you can see here we have 0. We also have undefined. All right, that's not a problem. Let's go ahead and console.log some things out just to see what we got here. So I'm going to console.log the data. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of an inspect. Let's go here. We're going to console.log. We get the object. And we have the data. And we have the name. Okay, so it's not questions of current question index. And it's called question, not name. So apologies for that. So we're going to say questions and then of current index. And then we're going to want the question.question, which is probably not the best naming convention. Sure, probably called it text, but it's called question.question. All right, so there we go. So now we have 0 and which compound has the highest boiling point. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new button. So let's create a button here. A button. And this button is, my goodness gracious, let's fix that. Let's go here. I'm going to say click me. And this button, what it's going to do is just change the current question index from 0 to 1. So we're going to say on click. And we're going to change the current question index. So this is going to call a function that is going to change the current question index from 0 to 1, like so. So let me go ahead and save this. So what we're expecting is whenever I click this button right here, this should become 1. And because this becomes 1, this should become, well, whatever the next question is in our JSON file. So this is the very first question with index of 0. And then this is the second question. What is the ground electronic configuration of chlorine? So this is what we're expecting. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And I want you to try and see the behavior here. And let me just zoom in just to really showcase this. So I'm going to click. And you can see that this does indeed change, but this doesn't. So what's happening is what we're doing is we're changing only the state of this. Now, because we're changing the state of this, what Svelte does is it updates anything that uses this within our HTML. So over here, you can see that this gets updated, but this doesn't get updated because in reality, we're not really changing this over here. So what we can do to bypass this is we can say, okay, what I want to do is I want to assign this variable, and then whatever that I use, whatever piece of state that I use, I want this question to also change if the state that I'm using to compute this variable also changes as well. Now to define that, what we can do is instead of using a let, we can use a $sign, so $:. And what this is going to do is, okay, well, I'm using this piece of state. It's going to figure out that you're using this piece of state. And anytime that this piece of state changes, we're going to go ahead and recompute this. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now if I were to click, you can see now that this gets completely recomputed. All right, so that's just a very important concept that we need to understand. Okay, so that is the current question index. Now we have the current question that we are on. Well, with the current question that we're on, we can, of course, go ahead and we'll pass that information as prompts to our question text component. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say question, and I'm going to say, well, the text is equal to. Now, before we did something like this, and that's because we passed in the whole object. Now, if you want to pass in something very specific from this question object, we can just say text is equal to, and I'm going to say here question dot question. So that's what we want to pass in. Now, just because we are passing that in, we of course have to accept it within our question text file. So of course, let's go right over here. And we're going to define the script. We're going to say lang of ts. And then over here, we're going to say export let. We're going to grab the text. And this should be a string. And then over here, let's go ahead and define that text. Go ahead and give that a quick save. Let's go here. And there we go. So now you can see, if I were to refresh the app, you can see here which compound has the highest boiling point. If I click again, now it gets changed to this. So this is looking pretty good. Let's remove the console.log, and also let's remove the question because we don't need that anymore. So this is a very important and fundamental concept. Now let's go ahead and start rendering some of the options. So what I'm going to do is we're going to create another file here. So I'm going to say question. We're going to call this question option. We're going to say .svelte. And then over here, this is what we're going to do. We're going to define a button. And this button is going to have, and apologies for this, this button is going to have a BG gray of 200. It's going to be nice and rounded. we're going to say width of, we're going to give it a very specific width of 49%. And then over here, let's give it a text of center. We're going to say padding of 2, margin bottom of 4, and then padding Y of 5. All right, so that should do it. And then over here, padding Y of 5. And then over here, what we're going to do is we're going to render the option itself. So of course, we need to kind of pass in that information. So let's go back to our page.svelte file. And then in here, what we are going to do is we are going to grab this current question that we're on and iterate over all of its different options. So let's go right below the text. I'm going to create a div. So I'm going to say div, and we're going to give this a class of flex, justify. We're going to give it between, and between like so. We're going to give it a flex wrap, and then we're also going to give it a cursor of pointer. All right, and then over here, we're going to iterate over the array of options, which are objects, of course, and we're going to render this question option component. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So we, of course, know how to do this already. We're going to have that each, and then over here, we're going to close off that each, and then we're going to say, well, for the current question that we're on, so we're going to say question dot options, and then what we're going to do, we're going to say as option, and then we're going to provide it with the option ID. All right, and then for each one, we're going to go ahead and render the question option, and again, notice that it auto imported everything in. So let's go ahead and give this a quick little save, and we'll save this as well. And for now, I'm just going to put some gibberish in here just so we can see some content on our screen. And there we go. So let me zoom out of here a little bit. We are seeing the content, which is terrific. So of course, what I would like to do is kind of just grab this whole option and just pass it in here altogether. Now we could just pass the text, but we're going to need all of the other information later. So I'm going to go ahead and just say curly braces and then option. And I'm going to go ahead and just save that in. Now, of course, it's yelling at me because we have to, define it over here as well. So we have to define that we want this option prop. So I'm going to say script lang. And then within this script lang, we're going to define that option. All right, so let's go right over here. And we're going to say exports. And we're going to say let option. Now the option has a very simple type. It has a label that is a string, and it also has a text that is also a string. And now what we can do here is we can just kind of utilize that text. So we can say option.text, save that, and over here it should stop yelling at us as it does. And there we go. So this is looking incredible. I mean, we're getting incredibly close to finishing our application. So what I would like to do now, of course, there's a few more things that we have to build. We have to build a button as well as these right over here. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. Let's begin with the button. So the button, let's go back to our component. We're going to call this question button dot svelte. So let's go ahead and open that up. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create a button that is going to have some relatively basic styles. So let's first define the button itself. So we're going to say here div, and we're going to give it a class of text center. And then over here, we're going to give it a button. We're going to give it a class of BG blue of 900, text of white. We're going to give it a font bold. We're going to give it a padding of 4. We're also going to make it nice and rounded, and then px of 16. And then what we're going to do is, for now, we're going to have just a submit button. Now, of course, later on, we're going to have to fix this because in our final application, you can see we either have a submit button or a next button. So we have to fix that, but we'll do that a little bit later. All right, so now we have our button. And now what we can do here is we can go ahead, go to our application, and let's render that button. So let's render that button. I would say let's render it right at the very bottom, right about here. So I'm going to say question button. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's go here, and there we go. So we got the text, we got the options, and we also have the button itself. And this is looking really, really good and very similar to what we had over here. Now we're missing these dots, these like kind of progress bars. We'll talk about those a little bit later because they're pretty complicated. But for now, this is pretty good, and I am relatively satisfied with what we got here. So let's go ahead and move on to the next lecture. In this video, what we are going to do is talk about global stores. So what do we eventually want to do within our application? Well, we want to select an answer, and then what we want to do is we submit it, and then we need to keep track of whether we got that answer correct or incorrect. And as you can see here, you can see that this is very important because this kind of progress bar, it needs to know, did this person get this question right or wrong? Because if they did, it's going to show red. And if it's not, then it's going to show them green. So right now, as you can see, if I were to go ahead and click on this question, now it says green over here. But it's not only this progress kind of circles that need to keep track of whether we have gotten the correct answer or not. If I were to click next and end the quiz, we are redirected to this page over here, which is the /results page. And this is going to show you your overall score. And this also would need to know whether you got the question right or incorrectly. Because as you can see, it is computing that you answered 2 questions and you got one of them wrong and one of them right, so you got 50%. So this is really, really important to grasp. So what we have here is we have this quiz/ID page where we're answering all of our different questions, but the answers to those questions, we need to grab them within 2 different pages. So we can't really store our state, our answer state, just in this file, in the page.svelte file that is over here, because if we did that, then we can't access it within our results. So instead, we need to store the answer state within some sort of global state that is accessible by any component and any page. And luckily, of course, we can do that with Svelte. So let's go ahead and define this state. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to go to the source directory, and we're going to create a store.ts file. And then within this, we're going to create a writable state. So I'm going to say here, const, export const, and I'm going to define this as answers. And initially, we're not going to do it like this. To define it as a global state, we need to import something from Svelte store, and that is going to be writable. So we're going to say writable, and over here, we're going to get that from the Svelte, and then /store, like so. And the reason why we need to define this as writable is because this variable right now is living outside of the Svelte file. So really it has no idea that it is going to be a piece of state that needs to re-render our HTML. Now to define it as a piece of state within our app, we would just say writable. And then over here, we would give it an initial value. And the initial value is going to be an empty array. And I say what we should do is define the type of this as well. So I'm going to say export interface, and we're going to say answer. And actually, let's do answer like so. And this is going to be, it's going to have an ID that is a number and also an is correct value. That is either going to be a Boolean or it's going to be null if it's not defined. So let's go over here. We're going to say that this is the type that we got. So we're going to say type of answer, and then it's going to be an array of these objects. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. We have defined our state here. Now what we can do is we can utilize this state within our Svelte app. So let's go back to this page. So this page right over here, this page.svelte file. And what we're going to do is, in order to utilize that piece of state within this store, we're going to go ahead and import it in. So I'm going to say import, and I'm going to import answers, and I'm also going to import the type of answer, and we're going to get that from, we're going to move a few directories from the store. So we're going to say from the store.ts file. Now we can't just go ahead and start utilizing this. We need to subscribe to it. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to define a new variable. I'm going to call this answers value, and I'm going to give it the type of answer array. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say answer, and we want to subscribe to it. So we're going to subscribe to it. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us the value that is within that state. And now what we can do is, once we have subscribed to it, we can just assign our answer value to that value. And that's it. So now we have access to our answers. So if I were to, of course, scroll all the way down here, we can just kind of pass that in and update it as we need. All right, so this is looking pretty good thus far. So what I would like to do in the next video is to update this answer global state whenever we get a question correctly. So let's go ahead and accomplish that in the next section. In this video, what we are going to do is update that global store that we have defined in the previous video. So what I want to do is I want to go over here to the app. I want to be able to, of course, click on whatever it is that I want. And then when I click submit, I want to update that global store to tell us whether we got that question right or wrong. So let's go ahead and do that. So right over here, the first thing that I would like to do, but even before I do that, is I kind of want to make these buttons clickable. So when I go ahead and I click on a specific button, it should be nice and yellow. So let's go to let's go right over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to define a new piece of state, and that is going to be the selected option. So I'm going to say we're going to say selected option. And this is going to be either null, which is nothing, or it's going to be a string. And that string is just going to be the label. So just as a quick reminder, let's go right over here to our data.json. You can see that each option has an ID, a label, and a text. And we just want to assign the option that we have selected to either A, B, C, or D. All right, so let's go right over here. So we have our selected option, which is either null or a string, but initially it is going to be null. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to pass that information to our options or question option as a prop. So right over here, we can say something like selected option, like so. Now, of course, we have to accept that. Let me just go ahead and just kind of remove all this other stuff because the page is getting a little bit busy. So we're going to go right over here. I'm going to say selected option, and we're going to accept that as a prop. So let's go over here. We're going to say export let, and we are going to say selected option, and I'm going to say null or string. All right, so now we have that piece of state passed into our question option. All right, so this is looking good, but of course right now the value is null and we want to do something with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a click handler, and very simply all this click handler is going to do is it's going to change the selected option. So let's go over here and I'm going to say on click. And what we're going to do is we're going to define a function that is going to do that for us. So let's go right over here and let's define, we'll call it an arrow function. And I'm going to go right over here and we're just going to very simply say, well, we're going to say on click, we're going to say selected option, and that is going to be equal to, and then that's going to be equal to the option.label. So option.label. Let's go ahead and give that a quick little save. And now let's go back to our Svelte file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just render that option. So I'm going to say the selected option is, and then over here I'm going to say, well, the selected option is the, well, selected option. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's go to our app. So you can see here the selected option is null. If I were to click on this, you can actually see that nothing is happening. So here's the thing though. Even though we are passing this as a prop into our component, we are defining it within this Svelte file. So we cannot change it in another component. We can only change the state in the component or in the Svelte file that we have defined it in. So this is what we're going to have to do instead. We're going to have to create a function. So we're going to say const. I'm going to say handle change option. And this is going to take in the label that is going to be a string. And then over here, what we're going to do is we're going to say selected option. Go ahead and save that. And that is going to be equal to the label, like so. So that's going to be equal to the label. So now what we need to do is we need to pass this function to this, we need to pass this function to the options themselves. So right below over here, we're going to kind of grab that, pass that in there. And now because we pass this function in, that function can go ahead and call it, but it's going to call the function that's defined within the same Svelte file that is also defining the state. So the state will indeed change. So now let's go back to our questions option right over here. And I'm going to say export let, and we're going to need to define the type of this. So one quick way to just grab the type is to just kind of hover over it, and you can just kind of copy that function type. And we can go ahead and do that. And now instead, what we're going to do is we're going to call this function with the label. So let's go here, pass that in, and we're going to call that function with the option dot label, like so. Save that, and let's also save this. And now if I were to come here, you can see now it is indeed changing. Okay, so this is looking pretty good thus far. Now what I would like to do is to have some sort of user feedback that it is indeed changing, rather than that kind of ugly text that we have here that I'm going to remove right now. So of course what we're going to do is we're just going to change the background color so that you know, it can either be yellow or gray or whatever. So let's go over here. Let's kind of wrap this in curly braces because we're going to be using template literals here. So I'm going to say template literal. And then over here, what we want to do is we want to change the background color. So over here, we're going to say, you know what? If the $sign, we're going to say if the option. So if the option dot label is equal to the selected option, then what we want to do is we want to render BG yellow of 200. And then we can also have an else here that just renders nothing. So let's go ahead and give that a quick little save. And now if we were to go back to our app, there we go. How cool is that? All right, awesome. So now what do we want to do? Well, now what we want to do is we want to click on this submit button. And whenever we click on this submit button, I want to change the overall global state of our application to check whether we got the right or the wrong answer. So I'm going to go right about here. And let's go back to our page.svelte file. Again, this is going to be this page.svelte file within the quiz directory. And then what we are going to do is I'm going to define another function. So I'm going to say here const, and I'm going to call this function handle submit. So handle submit. And then over here, what we're going to do is we are going to do answers, because now what we want to do is we want to update the answer itself. So we're going to say answers, and then we're going to say dot update this time in order to update the global state. Now we also get the value. So over here, this is the value. And now what we can do here is we can go ahead and update our answer. So I'm going to say here const, I'll say updated answer, and the value is the current answer of what it used to be. So over here, the current answer of what it used to be. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, what we want to do is we want to update that answer at the current question index. So we're going to say current question index, and we want to specifically update the is correct value. And we want to make that be either a Boolean value, which is true or false. And we're going to figure that out by saying the selected option is equal to the question that we are currently on. So the question dot answer. So again, let's look at the store here. So the answer is on the question level, and this is just the label of the option. So if we were to go back to our logic here, we're going to say the updated answer state, its is correct value. We're going to change it to the selected option, which is the label, and we're going to check if that's going to be equal to the question.answer. So that's either going to be a Boolean value of true or false. And then what we're going to do in order to actually update the state itself, we're going to go ahead and just return this updated answer. So we're going to say updated answer. Let me just call this updated answer state. And then I'm going to say state as well here, and then state as well. And this is here just the current state. So current state, just so we can make this as nice and clear as possible. All right, so I hope this makes sense. So over here we have the current state of our application. And then over here what we're doing is we're defining this new function, which is the updated answer state. And we're first initially making it the current state, and then we're updating a specific object property within this specific index to either a true or a false value, and then we're returning it, which is ultimately going to update this. So now what we can do is we can just kind of grab this handle submit, and we can pass it to this function. So I can just go ahead and pass that to our question button. So let's go right over here, and I'm just going to hover over this. You can see that this is the type that we need to define. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go to the question button. So let's go right over here to the question button. Where is that? Question about, and over here, components. We're going to have to, of course, accept that as a prop. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to go right about here. We're going to say scripts. We're going to say lang is equal to ts. And then what we're going to do, of course, is we're going to, say export. And we're going to define the function that we want to export. So this is going to be let, and then this is going to be handle submit. And then, of course, we're going to define the type, which is going to be this type right over here. Okay, so what we can do now is we can call this function, this submit function, whenever we go ahead and, we click this button. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say on click, and we're going to say handle submit, like so. All right. And one optimization that we should probably do is if you haven't selected an option, so if this is null, we should probably just return early. So let's just go ahead and do that and just like not do anything. So I'm going to say, if you haven't selected an option, I'm going to return early. However, if you have selected an option, then we're going to go ahead and kind of proceed to doing this state logic. Okay, so this is looking pretty good thus far. So what I would like to do is actually utilize that that state that we have within our options here. So whenever I click on this, I want to know if I got it right or incorrectly. And then, of course, I want to show you know, the green button, the yellow button, the whatever. Okay. So let's go over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a new piece of state, and I'm going to call this piece of state show correct answer. So I'm going to say here, let show correct answer, and this show correct answer, that is going to be initially false. And as soon as I go ahead and I submit this, I'm going to change show correct answer to true. So I'm going to say show correct answer. We're going to change that to true, and we're going to grab this and we're going to pass it into our question option. So I'm going to go here, use curly brace. I'm going to pass that in there. Let's go ahead and give that a quick save. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our question options, and we're also going to accept that. So I'm going to say export. I'm going to say let's, and I'm going to say show correct answer. And this is going to be a Boolean value. So within this is what we are going to do. So we're going to go ahead and check if we need to show the correct answer. Because if that is the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of change a lot of the background color of this class. So let's go ahead and accomplish that right now. So I'm going to go and add another $ curly brace within this template literal. And I'm going to say show correct answer. And I'm going to say, if we want to show the correct answer, then what we want to do is we want to kind of dynamically have the colors show up. So whatever you have selected, so let's say you've selected this, which is the wrong answer, then what we want to do is we want to turn this to red. However, if you selected this, we want to turn this to green, and then everything else that you haven't selected, we want to turn it to yellow. All right, we want to show the correct answer. Then what we want to do is we want to ensure whether we want to show the red or the green or the yellow. So we need to have some information about the answer itself. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to this page, and we are going to, right over here, we're going to pass in another prop, and that's going to be the answer. And we're just going to get that from the question dot answer, like so. And over here, of course, we're going to accept it, and that is going to be let answer. We're going to say that that is going to be equal to a string. Or sorry, we're going to have to define it as a type. And remember, so if we go back to our data structure, you can see here that we have the label, and we also have the answer, which is linked to whatever label. So now what we can do is let's go ahead and just give this a quick save, give this a quick save. I think everything should be fine now. Now what we can do here is we can start adding some really cool conditionals in order to figure out exactly what we want to display. So if we want to show the correct answer, then this is what we're going to do. We're going to say and. So we're going to have an and sign here. And then we're going to have some parentheses. And we're going to say if the answer that you gave us is equal to the option.label. So we're going to say option.label. Then what we want to do is we want to show, well, the BG green of 300. So BG green of 300. And then else, we're going to show BG red of 300. So BG red of 300, like so. All right, so that should pretty much do it. So let's go ahead and give that a quick little save here, and let's see if that works. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click submit, and there we go. So we have a bunch of red here, and this is not really working out the way that I want it to. Let's just see here. I'm going to select this. We got, this is the correct answer. Wait, no, this is not mine. This is not this is the final version, which also is kind of a little funky. Nonetheless, let's go over here. So we're going to select this, and there we go. So we get all of this is red, and then we get this one to be green, meaning that this one is indeed the correct answer. And now what we want to do is we want to move on to the next question. So what we need to do now is we need to change this button from submit to next. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is if we're showing the correct answer, then what we need to do is we need to kind of move on to the next question and show that next button. So let's go right over here, and to this question button, we need to pass it the show correct answer prop. So we're going to say show correct answer, give that a quick little save, and then we're going to go ahead and move into this question button, and I'm going to do a export let show correct answer. This shall be a boolean. And what we're going to do here is we're going to conditionally render either this button or a next button. And we haven't really seen how to do this before. So let's go ahead and show you this. And this is really, really simple, and it's very similar to what we have done before with the each. So we're going to wrap this with an if statement. So an if block right here. So we're going to say if we want to show the correct answer, then what we want to do is we don't want to show this button. We want to show another button. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. The button is going to be relatively similar. And then over here, what we can do is we can kind of wrap all of the things that we want to render with that if block. So let's go ahead and close it. So we're going to say if. And then over here, what we can do is we can have an else, like so. And then we can change this to next. So what are we doing here? This may seem a little confusing, but what we're doing here is we're conditionally rendering different HTML. So all the HTML that we want to conditionally render, we wrapped it in this if block. And then over here, this is the condition that we want. So if we want to show the correct answer, then what we want to do is we want to, well, render this button. Else, what we want to do is we want to render the submit. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if that works. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to do a quick little refresh. I'm going to go ahead and select this. There we go. And now you can see we get the next button. So all is left to do is just to handle the functionality for the next button, which is pretty easy. Let's go back over here to our page.svelte, and we are going to create another function. We're going to call this handle next. So we're going to say handle next, and what we're going to do is we're going to first show correct answer. That's going to be false because we're moving on to the next question, so we're going to set that to false. And then what we are going to do is we're going to say the selected option, that's going to be now null because we are not, the next question, we haven't selected an option. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to very simply just say current question index, and we're going to increment it by 1. So now let's go ahead and copy that. Let's paste that in there. So we're going to copy that, paste that in there. Let's go to the question right over here, and we can also export it. So let's just say export let's. We can just say handle next, and we're going to say void like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call the handle next instead of the handle submit. So save that and save that. And now we should have the functionality of moving on to the next question. So of course we can't click on it if we haven't selected anything. If we have selected something, there we go. Everything seems all fine and dandy. We can now move on to the next question, select another thing, and then see if we got it right or wrong. Now here's the thing though. When I select next, remember we only have 2 questions. So if I were to select next again, you can see the app kind of just holds and breaks. It seems like it's just holding, but there's just a bunch of errors that are happening in the console. So what we want to do instead is if we've reached the end of all of the questions, instead of, well, moving and incrementing the index to something that doesn't exist, what I would like to do is I would like to navigate to the results page. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to handle it right over here inside of the handle next. So let's go here, and I'm going to say if, and I'm going to say if current question index is equal to the question dot, we're going to grab the data dot questions dot length. Now remember, the index starts from 0, so we have to -1. And if that's the case, we're going to use that handy goTo function that we learned about. So goTo. And notice that we auto imported it here. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go to the results page. So we're going to go to /results. And then else, if we haven't reached the end, I am going to have an else clause. I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. So now what we can do is let's give that a quick little test here. And I'm going to select this. All right, next, select this. Okay, next. And there we go. So now we reach the results page. Of course, we haven't defined the results page. We have to do that a little bit later. But as you can see, it is nice and there. And we get this 404. Okay, so that pretty much sums it up for this particular page. Now all we need to do is just have those little kind of those little widgets here, or those little thing that show us the progress of each one of our different questions and how we answer them. And this is really when we're going to start using that global state. So stay tuned for that in the next video. In this video, we're finally going to utilize that global state in order to show the progress circles. So let's go over here and let's just create that component. So I'm going to go over here. Let's create a question and let's call this question. Let's call it progress circles. I think that's a good name. So question progress circle. And then within this, we're going to, of course, call it a Svelte file. Now within this, we're just going to have a bunch of different conditionals. So just right off the bat, what we're going to do is we're going to accept a prop whether that answer was correct or not, or whether it was null, which means it's unanswered. So let's go over here. We're going to say script and then lang, and I'm going to say ts, and we're going to accept this prop, which is going to be let is correct, and that's either going to be a Boolean value or it's going to be null, which means it's unanswered. So if it's true, that means it's correct. If it's false, that means it's incorrect. And if it's null, that means it's unanswered. So we're going to have a bunch of different conditions here. So we're going to have, let's add our condition. So we're going to say if is correct is equal to null, which means it's unanswered. Then what we want to do, and let's go ahead and fix that. So what we want to do is we want to return a div. Let's just use emit for this. We're going to give it a bg of gray of 200. We'll also give it a width of 4. Let's see if this works. It doesn't seem like it's cooperating. Emmet is not really cooperating here. Let's just create this manually here. Div, and then I'm going to say class, and I think it's just being kind of hard because we don't have the closing tag. All right, so we're going to say here bg of gray 200, and then we're going to give it a width of 4, and then here we're going to give it a height of 4. We're going to make it rounded, but we're going to make it rounded full so it can be a nice circle, and we're also going to give it a margin of 3. Now really we're only going to show the div itself, so we can just kind of close it off like that. All right. So, and of course we can remove these curly braces because we don't need them. Now we're going to have another case where, well, we're going to use an else if now. So we're going to say else if, we're going to say is correct is equal to true. Then what we want to do is we want to render this again. So let's copy that, paste that in there. But this time what we want to do is we want to make this nice and green rather than gray. So green. Let's also add another else if, and this time we're going to use red. So let's go here and let's grab this else if case. We can also make this an else case because that's really the only condition that is left. So we can just say else. Let's go ahead and just save that to format it. And there we go. That's really all it is that we need to show for our is correct progress circles. So now all we need to do is iterate over our is correct state that we have stored globally, and then very simply just go ahead and render this component. Now the thing that we need to do is we need to create the is correct array, because right now it's an empty array. So we need to go ahead and create it as soon as this page mounts. So let's go over here and we're just going to go, let's just go to the very bottom. I'm going to get the on mount. Notice that it auto imported from Svelte. And we are going to go over here and I'm going to call a callback function. And then within this callback function, we're going to say answers. And then we're going to say dot set, because now what we're doing is we're not updating, we're setting something. And then we're going to say data dot questions. We're going to iterate over every single question. And for every single question, what we're going to do is we are going to, and we don't even need the question variable itself. Actually, we do need it because we need the ID. So for every single question, what we are going to do is we're going to return the is correct object that we have defined. So remember, this has an ID, which is going to be the question.id. Now this is yelling at us because of the type. So let's just go ahead and just give it an any type for now. So over here, we're going to do this. And we're going to give it an is correct of null, because as soon as we render our application, is correct should be null because we haven't really answered anything. All right, so there we go. So now what we can do is we can iterate over the answer value, which is this one. It's completely unused at this point. So we can iterate over that, and then we can render those progress circles. So let's go right about, let's create another div. So I'm going to create a div with a flex. We're going to say justify center. And then here, let's have an each block. So I'm going to say each, and I'm going to say answer value as answer. And let's close off the each. And then over here, we're going to render the question progress circle. And of course, as the prop, we're going to pass in the is correct prop. That is going to be the answer dot is correct. So now if we save that and we go back here, you can see now we get those kind of circles right over here. And if I were to click this, you can see now this is red because that has turned to false, because of course we updated it. Remember, we updated it right here. This is where we have performed that update. And now we're going to move on to the next question. We get it right. And there we go. So now this is green. So we're utilizing this global state the way that we should. All right. So that pretty much sums up almost all the new concepts that we need to learn with Svelte. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to very, very quickly create the results page. And over here, there's really nothing new that should be taught. So you can honestly go ahead and do it on your own. But nonetheless, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. So of course, when we go to this page, you can see here we get this 404, and that's because our page is not defined. So let's go over here, and we need to go and define that page. So I'm going to say results. And because we have defined results, we need to have a page.svelte. So notice the plus sign. Again, we have a page.svelte. And then within here, let's go ahead and pretty much render everything that we need. Let's render all of the HTML. So I'm going to say text center, and we're going to add an H3 with, we'll say just an H3, I think is good. And we'll say that this is going to be, the percentage, let's say 50%. Of course, we're going to compute this a little bit later. Then we're going to have a P that's going to show, how many questions you got right. So we can say 1 out of 2. And over here, we're going to have a button. And I'm not really going to worry all too much about styling because this is just, it'll take away from Svelte. So this is what we want to show. But of course, we want to compute all of this. So let's go over here to the script. And we're going to say lang equal to TS. And over here, let's go and compute the very first thing, which is going to be the number of correct answers that we got. Now, in order to do that, what we're going to need to do is grab the answers from the store. So let's go over here, and we're just going to say import. And I'm going to say answers, as well as the type of answer. We're going to get that from the store right here. And of course, we want to subscribe to this within our page. So I'm going to say answers dot, and I'm going to say subscribe. We're going to grab the value, and we're going to, of course, assign that to a variable. So let's say let answers value, And we're going to say that this is going to be of type answer array. And over here, what we can do is we can just say answers value is equal to the value itself. So now that we have the answers value, what we can do is we can actually compute the number of correct answers. So I can say const number of correct answers, and that's going to be equal to the answers value. We're going to use the reduce function because we're going to reduce an array into a number. So over here, we're going to grab the first parameter is going to be the sum. And if you're unfamiliar with the reduce function, completely fine. I highly suggest that you kind of go ahead and read up on it. And over here, let's assign this to an empty array just so we don't get this error here. So we're going to say answer and then, or the sum as well as the answer here. And then we're going to give it the initial value of 0. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to check, well, if answer dot is correct. So if we got the correct answer, then what we're going to do is we're going to return the sum plus 1. Else what we're going to do is we're going to return the sum without adding 1. And this should give us the number of correct answers. So what we can do here is we can just grab this, and over here we can just kind of utilize that instead. So we can just say number of correct answers and invoke it like that. Okay, so that is the number of correct answers, but now we need to get the number of questions. So number of questions is pretty easy. So all we really have to do is just say const number of questions. So const number of questions, and we're going to say that this is going to be the answers value dot length, because for each question we should have an answer itself. And over here now what we can do is grab that and we can just kind of paste that in there. There we go, just like that. Save that. Now this is complaining. Let's see why. So type number has no signature call. All right, okay, this is good. This is why I love TypeScript, because we didn't really return anything. So actually, no, we did return. So this should be type of number. Okay, yeah, not a problem, not a problem. So this isn't a function actually, so we shouldn't be calling this. This is just a value, a number itself. And if we were to go back here now, you can see we have, well, 0 out of 0. Let's just go through the flow again. But let's just compute this really quickly now. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to say that we want the number of correct answers divided by the number of questions. And then we're going to multiply this by 100. So let's just wrap this in parentheses like so. We're going to multiply it by 100. And then we're going to wrap this whole thing in parentheses. And then we're just going to fix it to just 0 decimal places. We're going to say dot to fixed, and we're going to say 0, and then we're going to add a % at the very end. Now this button right over here is going to allow us to go back. So let's just go over here. We're just going to call this, and what this is going to do very simply is, well, let's just call a function called go handle back. And this is just going to clear our answers, and it's going to make us go back to everything that we had before. So let's just go over here. We're going to say handle back, and that's going to be an arrow function. Again, apologies. I'm still not really used to this keyboard. So we're going to go over here. We're going to say answers.set. We're going to set that to be an empty array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call that goTo function. We're going to go back to the root of our application. All right, so that should do it, and that pretty much should sum up our application. So let's just go back here. I'm going to refresh the app. Let's go here. I'm going to get this one right, and then we're going to go over here. We're going to get this one wrong, and there we go. So let me zoom in here. We get our 50%, 1 out of 5, and we can go back as well. Okay, now one last thing that we could possibly do just for safeguarding is right now a user, if they really wanted to, they can go to the /results, and we get kind of this ugly look right over here. Of course, we don't want this. So what we can do is we can have an on mount. So as soon as this thing is mounted, what we can do is we can do a little check. So we can say, okay, if answer value dot length is 0, which means that, you know, it's going to be a falsy value, what we want to do is we want to go to the home page. So you can't really go to this page unless you have an actual answer. As you can see here, it doesn't allow us to. All right, so now there we go. Let's go to the next one. There we go. Go to the next one. And there we go. That sums up our application. Hopefully you guys learned quite a lot about Svelte, and I'll see you guys in the next one.